know exactly what they're supposed to do because they practice it to qualify for this tournament.
Yeah, and absolutely. On top of that, both of these two teams were on the top floor of the dungeon. Only 25 seconds apart on their time, so both of these teams know exactly what they're doing. Now, we did see two completely different strats yesterday. We saw two different teams doing two different strategies. One of the teams pulled Rezan first, one of the teams went up to Vol'kaal first. So it'll be interesting to see which of the two Puolukka does, or they might do a completely different strat.
Yeah, we saw one team, 40k, actually pulled those Colossuses over and actually killed them, which actually turned out like they won the whole map against, I believe it was Abrakeydabra. So they had a good strategy here, but we see both of those teams running back after this strat, even though Team Puolukka actually has some trouble here with this.
Yeah, the rogue dropping very low there, even proccing his cheat death at 4%. Once again, this pull isn't too dangerous because the healers are standing on top of the pillar to bait all of the Juggernaut charges, and then the rogues and the Elemental Shaman on the side of Team Puolukka can lock down all of the dangerous cast times.
Yeah, so on Method and Ace side here, they already moved forward to the Sky Screamers and those small raptors here to jump around that are pretty dangerous because it is a 45 setting, of course, and we have Raging, so once the mobs are really low, it does do a lot of damage when they jump around.
It's also important to mention the other affix because when you're doing these time trial dungeons, you really need to make sure you're pulling as much as possible, but one of the biggest limiters on that is the explosive affix. If you pull too many mobs, you'll get too many explosives, and it's really hard to deal with, 4 or 5 plus explosives because they'll explode and kill your team pretty easily.
Yeah, of course. So one thing to mention about the rogues, of course, is that they are really good at killing the explosives, not only because they're doing so much damage to them and killing them easily, but one more thing to note is that they're cleaving off of the explosives. Now, some other classes, they can kill them very easily too, but while they use their global to kill the explosive, they're not doing damage to anything else. While the rogues can kill the explosive, and because of their blade flurry, they will cleave off of the explosives and not lose any damage on the trash.
So it looks like Method and A is doing the exact same strategy they pulled off yesterday. They went down and pulled the two Sky Screamers on the left side of the dungeon, as did Team Puolukka. So pretty much exact same strats coming out of the dungeon. Now, on the side of Method and A, we see this important strategy where they use their blind on both of the honor guards so they don't get any of that massive AoE group damage. All they have to worry about is dealing with the two Hexers that they only have to interrupt, and the shield bearers that they need to stun when that dome goes down, causing everything to take reduced damage.
Yeah, and of course, with that triple melee setup, you have so many interrupts to deal with those Hexers, with those casters, and of course, they also have a lot of single target stuns to just remove those bubbles that reduce the damage taken, which instantly comes out as we see here.
And we see Puolukka actually pulling one of the honor guards. Now, I think this is probably a little bit more dangerous to do, but it does give more mob count, so we'll have to see what the difference is in terms of time here. It looks like Method and A is definitely ready to move on, though, after their smaller, much safer pull.
Yeah, so they're on 39%, they're just short of the second Reaping Wave to spawn. They are using their Shroud here. They're either going to the boss or pulling the trash pack, and we see they're actually going to the boss.
Yeah, once again, going into the Vol'kaal room, the mechanics of this boss, it's a two-phase fight. There are 3 totems in each corner of the room. You need to kill all 3 of those totems at the exact same time. At the same time, the boss will leap towards players and start casting an ability that you need to interrupt. Otherwise, it'll start putting a debuff on all players in the group.
Yeah, so phase 1, the damage is important on the totems, but of course, the boss is not actually damageable, so you want to make sure that all the totems die at the same time as fast as possible. And one thing to note here, that they also spawn explosives, right? And as we mentioned, there's just no range DPS on Method and A's side to deal with the explosives, so they need to make sure that on each totem there's 1 DPS at least to make sure they can kill those explosives and not have any of them go off.
And we see Method and A quickly entering phase 2 just as Team Puolukka starts pulling the boss in phase 1, with the main difference being that Team Puolukka did pass their 40% raging mark, so they dealt with that second wave of reaping rather, sorry. Vol'kaal in the second phase starts exploding all over the place, similar to what the honor guards do outside, and you can see here, you don't really want to deal with the honor guards, especially if they're going to act just like this boss does.
Yeah, so on Team Puolukka side, we do have 1 death. Now, this was intentional because they had to shroud or death skip to the boss. Now, of course, Frusha can't be an Adel, so he had to die, and they had to rest him back up, which, again, we mentioned this a lot, but the fact that the Shaman just can't be an Adel is costing them 5 seconds here, 5 seconds there, rest timer here, rest timer there, and in the end it will just add up and it will be a disadvantage.
We see Vol'kaal just about to go down for Method and A right after this boss fight. I believe they're planning on using their second Shroud to get to the next pull in the dungeon, where they'll be dealing with, once again, 2 Hexers and 2 Shield Bearers, in addition to 2 brand new mobs, the little ninjas.
Yeah, so we have the stalkers, I believe they're called. So they are stealth. They patrol on a certain direction around. Usually when you have a demon hunter, they can actually use their spectral side to see where they are, but they probably know exactly where they are because they will reach the same point of the dungeon at the same time always, right, since they're practicing. So they know, so we practice this dungeon a lot. If we're reaching this moment at, let's say, 5 minutes into the dungeon, then the stalkers will be exactly in this position, right? So they know where the stalkers are. We saw Nerve jump in there, pick them up immediately, and drag them into the next pack.
Also, really important to note there that they do use the Ring of Peace the second all 6 of these mobs get into their raging affix. It's just really strong mob control. Make sure their tank doesn't get hit by anything. The biggest thing to watch out for is that these shield bearers also have a mechanic called shield bash, which if you kite them around too much, they tend to shield bash their closest targets. So if you have a melee that's too close to them, they can't instigate your melee. Method NA also moving forward quickly, pulling 2 packs of swords with 2 Sky Screamers, making sure they're being efficient pulling 2 packs together. These swords are incredibly dangerous, however, especially on this explosive affix and with raging.
Yeah, we see Yoda actually going down here with all those explosives, and the stalkers is jumping around on with this raging affix. We do see the Belras coming out of JB, so Yoda is back alive, and they managed to recover this pull, but the dangerous pull coming in here from Method NA.
Yeah, it looks like they're getting through it relatively cleanly. I mean, you kind of have that battle res as a savior just in case you mess up. I mean, that's probably the best case scenario for them. 1 death on that pack is pretty safe because, I mean, you have to deal with 10 mobs jumping around doing massive AoE group damage if you're 2 stacked. And on top of that, while they're jumping around, they have a chance to spawn explosives away from the group. So 1 death, I mean, it's a lot better than wiping for sure. And we see them moving on to Rezan here.
Yeah, so they proc their Weeping Wave on top, and then they jump down to engage Rezan, and they also get, of course, the Reaping Wave coming down towards them, so they're not wasting any time on this Reaping Wave. They're just going to cleave it down while fighting Rezan. Now, Rezan is a very straightforward boss and not very dangerous except on tank damage. Now, once in a while, he will fixate 1 player and will pretty much walk towards this player. If he reaches the player, he will eat him and do a lot of damage, as we actually can see right here. So Nerve didn't walk far enough and actually got eaten, and we see him getting a lot of damage.
Yeah, fortunately, he is a warrior tank, so we can deal with that pretty easily. Now, one of the things to mention is that you can cast abilities while you're eaten, as long as they don't require you to be facing your target. So he can use cooldowns as well while you're in there. It wasn't too dangerous. It did require a lot of healing, although that wasn't necessarily an ideal situation for them.
Yeah, I think the problem was there that he wanted to pick up the Reaping mobs, and sometimes the range of the boss actually reaching you is further than you think it is. So sometimes you might think, oh, I'm safe here, but then he just picks you up and you're not actually safe. Yeah, we see both Team Puolukka and Method NA are pretty much playing the same route, except Team Puolukka played a little bit more like these honor guards, like you mentioned before. So they do have 5% more trash percentage here, but they're playing the same route, so they're both on Rezan right now. Of course, Team Puolukka being a little bit behind on boss damage because they do have this 5% trash more that they did.
Now, usually what these teams will do when they get to this boss is they'll use their shadow melds in order to cancel off any fixates. So it's surprising that they even had a fixate go off there.
Yeah.
We do see a fixate going off here. We'll win on the tank again, unfortunately. I don't think he has a shadow meld up available for that. So once again, the boss is going to chase the tank again, and everyone's going to have to shuffle across the room with the dinosaur, which is actually pretty unfortunate because they're going away from the direction they need to go. They need to go in the other direction in the dungeon to move on to the rest of the polls.
Yeah, these small things you talked about earlier, actually, about Method EU. So with Method EU, they kind of just had all these small little things with movement that just saved them so much time if you add it up together. Now, we see Method NA here. They ended up the boss fight to be in the wrong side. So now they did have to mount up and walk the way back. Now, this is only going to be 2 or 3 seconds, but this is a race, right? And every single second counts.
And we did see the same thing happen to Team Puolukka as well. They are in that same back corner because it went on the Ellie Shaman, who, as we've mentioned many times, cannot be a Night Elf, so cannot Shadow Meld, doesn't have any way of dropping that combat. Method NA using a Shroud to get another double sword pack pull here, and they're also pulling in both Sky Screamers. So there are 3 Sky Screamers in this pull, meaning 3 mobs that need to be interrupted. If those interrupts do go off, the entire group will be feared, meaning they're probably going to die.
That would be a disaster if one of those fears go off. Now, we mentioned before that Triple melee are just very good at interrupting, so as long as they assign 1 player for each Sky Screamer, they should be alright. But this pull was just very scary in general because of all these swords that they're jumping around, especially with raging. So what Method NA did was they finished off the swords, the small mobs, and the Sky Screamers, of course, have more HP, and they just pulled them into the next pack.
Yep, and it looks like they pulled them in the next pack. They don't really need any interrupts for the next pack except for 1 or 2 interrupts on the augurs. Once the augurs are interrupted, they don't cast for another 30 seconds or so, so they don't really require too much attention. It's just all about making sure you deal with the important mobs first and make sure you focus your DPS on those, and once those are dead, you can kind of just relax for the rest of the pack and then move on further in the dungeon.
Yeah, so they're reaching the point of this room with the Priestess, right? This is the one room where the most difficult pull probably out of this whole dungeon starts, and where the last time we saw Method and A doing this pull, they actually wiped. So we'll see if they try to do the same pull with their Bloodlust being ready, or if they try to do something safer maybe.
Yeah, the most dangerous moment of this pull is going to happen right after they initiate the pull. JB's going to move to the back of the room so that he can bait the Juggernaut charges. We see him moving towards it right. He's going to start doing it right about now. And while he's doing that, the tank he's moving over there right now. And the tank isn't getting that many heals when he's moving. So this is the most dangerous part of the dungeon right now. And it looks like they're doing it pretty clean this time. No explosives going off that wiped them last time. They're just AoEing everything down perfectly right now.
I think this time around they did it a little bit different, because the last time I saw Method and A doing this pull, JB walked to this Juggernaut safe spot immediately. Now, if you're on the safe spot, there's one problem, right? You might be out of range from the people that are standing there. That's why they pull them so close to this ledge, to the stairs. But Nerf was pulling them up, and he was running out of range of JB while he was already standing on this spot, not managing to pre-hot the tank. So even we did have an explosive go through, and that's what killed him. But maybe if he had some hots on him beforehand, and maybe if he had some healing, then maybe he wouldn't have died. So we saw JB holding off and running to that safe spot just to make sure that Nerf is around him.
Well, you know what they say, lightning never strikes twice, and fortunately they don't wipe here again. Moving on to Priestess Alunza, another cyclical boss encounter like we've seen so many times in this dungeon. Whenever the boss gets to 100 energy, she will target all of the players in the group with a spell called Transfusion. Now, she also spawns 5 blood puddles around the room, 1 for each player. If the player does have a blood puddle, it will cause the boss to deal damage to herself when she casts Transfusion. If the player has not picked up a blood puddle, she will heal herself. Now, because of this mechanic, the boss tends to die pretty quickly because the Transfusion cast does a lot of damage to the boss.
Yeah, we also see those ads spawning in the background that are being rooted and blinded and CC'd in any way, because those ads, they will try to walk towards those pools and actually remove them if they reach them. So they will just be CC'd and ignored pretty much. Now, one thing to mention on Team Puolukka's side, they did not use their Bloodlust for this very big pull that both teams did. And at the same time, they also triggered the 100% reaping already and killed it on top of Priestess. Now, even though it looks like Team Puolukka is a little bit behind, but this Priestess is going to die very soon because of the Transfusion, and then they will reach the last boss with their Bloodlust ready and not having to kill any more mobs.
Yeah, the important thing about the Transfusion buff is it does about 25% of the boss's HP, so they still have about 10% to do to the boss, while Method and A is moving onwards. Now, Method and A, like you said, they still have to proc their 5th Reaping Wave, and it's going to be interesting to see whether they do that right now, which they appear to be doing right now. What they're planning on doing is shadow melding that trash before they move on to the final boss.
I think those swords actually don't give enough percentage, so they need to cool... Oh, actually, okay, so it did give enough percentage. They will go onwards, and as you said, probably shadow melt away those things. Or even if they don't shadow melt, they could just kill it on top of the boss, because they do have a lot of passive AoE. But yeah, once again, Team Puolukka down the boss now. They're on their way to the last boss. They still have to trigger the event, though, and it takes a while until the stairs open. You can actually walk up to the boss, while Method and A already engaged Yasma.
So all of the difference right now is just time-based, right? Method and A pulled the boss probably about 20 to 25 seconds earlier. However, Team Puolukka still has the Bloodlust available for this boss. Now, on the side of Method and A is a fortified dungeon, so that Bloodlust isn't necessarily as important to take down the tyrannical boss, but it's still going to be incredibly close and down to the wire. The only other difference is going to be the difference that a monk can do on single target versus what an Ellie Shaman can do. Yeah,
so I think, to be honest, an Elemental Shaman, we've seen before that they're so good on single target damage if they have this Bloodlust. As we can see here on the opener, almost peaking to 60k DPS because of just those big cooldowns and the Bloodlust coming in. Now, of course, on the other side, the monk is doing a little bit less single target damage, but he's also buffing the damage of everyone else. And we see, of course, also the rest of it is trying to do as much damage as possible. This is so close.
Yeah, when we pulled this boss, Method and A had the boss at 70%, so there was a 30% gap. With that Bloodlust, they've already closed that gap to 20%, and they're still gaining, but their Bloodlust is about to run out, so Method and A should keep this 20% lead throughout the rest of the fight.
Yeah, so we see the Bloodlust is still going on. Now, Shakib dropped really low, but of course, that's a cheat death, so he didn't go down. Now, both of those teams also have 1 death, so there's no time difference at all. So depending on just who does more damage will win here.
I mean, any 1 death at this point can make it. If Method NA dies, that's enough for Team Puolukka to catch up and kill this boss. So Method NA, all they need to do is keep it clean, make sure they deal with the ads, don't get hit by any spiders, and just kill the boss.
Yeah, so 15%, the boss is dying really fast here from Method NA, so I don't think Team Puolukka can catch up at this point. One problem as well for the Elemental Shaman, there's just a lot of movement on this fight, right? For a melee, it doesn't matter because he can keep sticking to the boss, but the Elemental Shaman has to move sometimes from those spiders just chasing and losing damage.
They're going completely all in here. They know how close it is. They ring a piece of those ads away, don't spend any time dealing with the ads, and they clean it out very well. Impressive win.
I don't think I have casted the last time they did this dungeon, so I'm not completely sure what strat they're running, but I assume it's the same as we've seen from other teams with the DK, right?
Yeah, they definitely do a lot of emphasis on making sure they pull Reaping packs into bosses, into other packs. They're incredibly good at it. They've been doing it since practice runs before time trials. The thing about Team Puolukka is we haven't really seen them do much, and we know that they don't have the Unholy DK to benefit from the exponential AoE, so it's going to be interesting to see how they do the pulls.
Yeah, maybe they have some different routes planned that is playing around this Elemental Shaman of theirs. Maybe they even pull something completely different. We will see. But we do have, of course, different affixes here. We have Tyrannical, Sanguine, Volcanic, and Reaping, of course. Now, Tyrannical means that the boss fight just take a long time. So, of course, single target does matter. And even though Unholy DK, single target damage is not that great, but the more, if you can pull the Reaping on top of it, then they can catch up a little bit on the single target damage because of this faster mind, right?
And once again, we see Method NA doing a pull where they're CCing the mobs that they don't want to deal with, and they're going to shadow meld them later on in the dungeon. Lighty going down really low, 10% there, but it looks like he's safe here. Yoda also dropping pretty low, but it looks like they're... Ooh, Yoda hasn't practiced cheat death yet. He's probably fine. Now they're dealing with this AoE packet that's incredibly dangerous because they have this chosen blood matron here.
Yeah, we see Team Puolukka also dropping really low. I think the rogues just dealing with those trash mechanics, or getting targeted by the trash mechanic a lot, because we do have this barb shot, of course, and the net that do a lot of damage on top of just having the matron buff everyone. Now Team Puolukka is on the first boss now. They do have the Bloodlust ready. They might choose to not use it and save it for a later pull.
But once again, we're going to see right here where this Unholy DK comes into play. Reaping coming into the boss with Bloodlust. You're about to see a DK do a lot of damage for the first 20 seconds of this boss.
Yeah, so we talked about Faster Mind now. That's a talent that pretty much whenever you have your wounds on all those mobs and you pop them, then depending on how many targets you hit, you will get strength and it will stack up. There's a cap to it. There used to be not a cap at all, but now there's a cap at 20, so if you do have the traits for it, you will get approximately 6,000 strength.
And even though Team Puolukka pulled the boss probably 5 to 10 seconds before Method NA, Method NA has already caught up and passed them with the power of that Unholy DK on single target. Nerf dropping incredibly low there, but it looks like he's going to be fine.
Well, Nerf actually got hit by one of those abilities from the bosses. When they jump to a player and cast this red circle around them, you have to go away, because if you get hit by it, it actually does a lot of damage. But Nerf is a tank, so he did manage to survive, thankfully.
The main mechanic of this boss is, of course, the Blood Bolt cast that you need to interrupt. Now, one of the strengths of Prot Warriors is they have what's the name of the ability? My brain is...
Spell Reflect?
Spell Reflect, thank you. Really easy name. Forgot it. Spell Reflect. They can reflect the Blood Bolt back to the boss and do more damage. On the side of Team Puolukka, we see a full team wipe on the first boss. This is... very unfortunate.
So the boss is very low already, but they had the second mirror image spawn. Now, as you said, the Black Bolt, very important ability from this boss side. If you do not interrupt this ability, it will do an incredible amount of damage to their aggro target. So if it is the tank, then he can spell reflect the Black Bolt and do a significant amount of damage to it. But if the tank doesn't pick up aggro immediately from this ad and it goes through to someone else, then they will die, of course. So I believe there was some interrupts just not going through, or the tank thinking he could spell reflect or not actually having aggro.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate. That might have been the same thing that had Nerf go low earlier. It's going to be important to see what Team Puolukka can do now, because we saw the same thing happen to the team that played Method NA last time around. Team 40K had a problem right before the first boss, and they weren't able to get back because they had used all of their skips at that point. Method NA moving on to Krag'wa's room on the other hand, and we've seen how they pull this room before. They do 2 big pulls where they do both halves of the room, which is incredibly dangerous considering the mechanics of the mobs in this room.
Yeah, so there's a couple of difficult mechanics to deal with those mobs, especially this Blood Swarmers that we see here on the right side. Now the Blood Swarmers do fixate on a random target and they will try to attack them. They are slow, so you can walk away from them, but if you walk too far, they will actually rush on top of you and melee hit you for a lot of damage. On top of that, we of course have these living rods, which aren't too dangerous because all they do is pretty much hit the tank, walk really slowly, and cast those green pools that they need to walk out of. But there's a lot more dangerous mobs that we can see being pulled here.
And we can see that even pulling 2 Feral Bloodswarmers at the same time is incredibly dangerous, because if one person gets fixated by both Bloodswarmers, they can get meleeed down quickly. And the important thing to remember about that melee damage is it's not actually physical damage, it's shadow damage, so less things actually defend from it. Now, of course, if it goes on a rogue, they can just cloak of shadows, but other people in the group might not have enough personals to deal with that.
Yeah, we saw one of the maggots here is being stepped on the side. Now those maggots also have one very, very deadly ability. They will target a random player and will start casting a cone, pretty much, a poison cone that you need to interrupt. You can only interrupt it with stunts or knockbacks.
Now we see this huge pull once again coming out of Method, and they're going to be pulling the other half of Krag'wa's room with this reaping. Once again, pulling about 30 mobs together to let that Unholy DK pop off. The way this works out so well for them is that what they do is, because of that exponential damage, by the time the Reaping mobs are dead, the rest of the trash pack is at 20%. They're abusing that exponential damage from the Unholy Decay. However, this pull is still dangerous. They need to make sure that they're getting all of their interrupts and CC off on the important targets. You see that Fetid Maggot getting its Rotten Bile cast off. They need to make sure they're stunning that so nobody gets broken by any frontal AoE.
Yeah, but we do see the Blood Swarmer actually getting CC'd, getting stepped, so we don't have this fixate on top of all this other damage that we see going out here. I think one of the maggots didn't actually get interrupted immediately, so we saw one of those cones going through and people dropping really low.
This is actually incredibly dangerous, because you have to remember this is a sanguine dungeon, and JB does go down. He did go down at this exact same point yesterday, so we'll have to see if they're able to put together the pull. Fortunately, they have a DK for a battle res available in the group, which is something you don't have when you're running a double rogue monk group. This is just one of the benefits to having a DK in this dungeon. The mobs that they have left aren't nearly as dangerous. The tank can just kite them around, and because they were able to get JB back up, they're going to pull that last Bloodswarmer into the group. I think they pulled that Bloodswarmer with the group yesterday, and not pulling it this time was definitely a change they've made just to be a lot more safe.
Yeah, so the way they go through this Krag'wa room was very efficient by them. So they went to the left side first, where behind the boss there's actually the most amount of Bloodswarmers. And we did say that the Bloodswarmers are probably the most dangerous mobs in this group, because they can't really interrupt their abilities. They can't do anything about it. It's just a fixate that pretty much starts killing the melees. So they did go to the left side. They killed most of the Bloodswarmers first, and then did this huge pull, just abusing this DK damage.
And once again, like you said, abusing the DK damage, pulling the 60% Reaping Wave into the boss so that the DK can use all of that AoE to put Festermite strength damage into the boss. Now, talking about Krag'wa's abilities, he has 2 major abilities in Phase 1 that he uses. He'll do a Frontals AoE that we saw Nerf take to the face right there, because it casts on the tank. And then also Krag'wa will occasionally choose someone in the group and charge towards their location. At the beginning of the fight, this is really important to deal with, because if the boss charges towards where they left Sanguine from the trash pack, the boss can heal for 10-15%.
Definitely. Now, we see whenever Krag'wa does any of those abilities, either the frontal tank ability or the charge or the tantrum, he will leave behind those pools on the floor that you need to soak. So you need to walk into them. If you don't walk into them fast enough, then the maggots will spawn out of it, and they will attack anyone who has aggro on them and leave behind a really dangerous bleed debuff.
Yeah, so you can see the tell of a good team making sure they get all of the blood ticks done. They do have one, but one isn't necessarily going to cause too many problems in the group. One thing we also didn't mention is that Tantrum does do massive AoE damage to the group. Generally speaking, they're planning forward for that. There's going to be 2 or 3 of them throughout the fight, so they'll probably use a rotation such as personal damage boosting cooldowns on the first one. The healer will use his cooldown to do more healing on the second, and on the third one they'll use pretty much whatever they have left to live through.
Yeah, so he's just going to repeat these phases now in the normal phase where he does the charge and the frontal, and then he will continue to do the tantrum again. Now we see on the other side on Team Puolukka, unfortunately this one wipe on the boss put them very, very far behind. Now they're trying to recover. They did kill the first boss in the meantime, but they do have 9 deaths. They are not even in Krag'wa's room yet, so there's so much they need to catch up on.
And the thing to remember is that these teams are able to watch the feed at home, albeit with a pretty significant delay. So Team Method is going to know that Team Puolukka is struggling in this dungeon, so they might opt to pull a little bit safer throughout the rest of the dungeon because of that. We'll have to see what they plan on doing.
Yeah, so Method NA, we saw struggles a bit in earlier dungeons where they maybe did a little bit too risky pulls, or they had one mistake that cost them so much. So we saw Method NA today, at least, do some pulls that were a little bit safer, and maybe, as you said, just to see the Blood Swarmer instead of pulling it on top of this group, and it's working out for them so far. They haven't really have any mistakes except this one death from JB coming in.
And of course, the most dangerous part of the fight here is going to be when this third tantrum goes off. They don't really have anything up for this other than maybe Hellstones or healing potions. Fortunately, the boss is at 3 or 4%, so even if they do get a couple of deaths, looking at how low they dipped there, they were going to be perfectly fine. And the boss goes down.
Yeah, so they're 62% trash. They are 18% off the next Reaping Wave still, but they're going to go towards the third boss here. They are shrouding around this worm here that you see is not spawned yet, but you can see this cloud on the floor. If you go too close to them, the worm will spawn out of the ground and you have to deal with it. Now, those worms usually are not very efficient to kill because they don't move. So you need to either pull other trash on top of them, or we just skip them as we see here.
We see them do another relatively decently sized pull here, but there's only 2 mobs in this group that you really need to interrupt. You have the Bloodsworn Defiler that you need to keep on lockdown, as well as the Fallen Guardian that will occasionally buff one of his minions to do more damage. As long as you stun that, it won't really do too much damage to the tank, and they deal with it perfectly.
Yeah, that was a really good pull by them. They did kill all the mobs at the same time and were already walking towards the next pull while they were dying. So we can see them actually walking past the boss for now. Maybe they're either waiting for Bloodlust or for other cooldowns to come up. Now they're pulling some of the one of the Corruptors. Now those Faceless Corruptors, they do have some scary abilities, and they also have a lot of HP. Now this Corruptor does spawns those tentacles, as we can see around it. After a couple of seconds, they will swing and do a lot of damage. And on top of that, they also have a frontal that if you get hit by it, it will fear you and do a lot of damage.
Right, this is a little bit more dangerous than the pull they just did, although it has pretty much the exact same mobs. One of the skeleton groups with the stun ability that we mentioned before, on top of the abilities you dealt with the Corruptor. Shakib going down, unfortunately, here. We'll have to see if they use their battle res on him, and they do. So no more battle reses for the rest of the dungeon for Method NA, barring any extreme time changes. But that, like we said, that pull is a little more dangerous than the previous one. If you get hit by any of the mechanics there, they almost one-shot you.
Yeah, especially because they're pretty much running a full melee setup, right? And those tentacles from those Corruptors, they're just so annoying. So usually what you want to do, because they spawn close to players, so what you want to do if you pull the Corruptors on top of other mobs, you want to, once the tentacles are spawned, you want to drag the mobs away from the tentacles, because else just all the melee have to walk away from the tentacles, not being able to do any damage.
And once again, we see here, this is the reason I love watching their strats so much. They proc this 80% Reaping Wave. They're going to pull it right up into the third boss. And once again, every single boss so far, they pulled Reaping into the boss, abusing the Unholy Decay, funnel into single target on top of the Outlaw Rogue's single target damage when they're able to Blade Flurry a bunch of mobs as well.
Yeah, this is just so efficient by them. They even pulled those 2 Defilers in front of the boss on top of this. Now, this is a difficult pull because not only do you have all the Reaping to deal with, all those pools on the ground that you need to dodge, but there's also orbs coming in that you need to dodge at the very same time while dealing with this upheaval that you can see. Now, how this boss works is there's mushrooms that spawn around the room, right? And if you get hit, if you walk into a mushroom, you will get an explosion around you, and you will also receive a disease debuff that stacks that does ticking damage. Now, when the boss casts his AoE, the rest of the mushrooms that are still there will explode on the whole group, and depending on how many mushrooms, they will stack up and do a lot of damage.
Now, fortunately, this group doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with these mushrooms. They have 2 poison dispels in the monk and in the druid, and on top of it, they have the rogue's cloak of shadows to be able to move everything.
Okay, so it's actually a disease, so only the monk can dispel it, but that should be good enough because usually one player can just pick up a lot of them, use a defensive, and then you can dispel it, so all of the debuffs just go away at once. And as you said, of course, the cloak coming in as well, and the AMS, so they have a lot of ways to deal with it. Now, they did manage to kill the trash, enter Reaping, now they only have the boss left. Of course, the Defilers that they pulled on top also need a lot of interrupts, so very good control by them here.
And we see as well how far ahead in the dungeon they are. They're lower on the third boss than Team Puolukka is on the second boss, in addition to being 1 Reaping Wave ahead. So it looks like that one wipe from Team Puolukka is putting them very far behind, but there is room in this dungeon for another big wipe for Method NA. So it's not like Team Puolukka is completely out of it yet, but it would require something pretty catastrophic for Method NA for them to get back in.
Most definitely. The last boss is quite difficult too. As I said, it is a tyrannical setting, right? So anything can happen on these bosses, and they are out of battle resist. So if anyone dies here, they're not able to get them back up, and especially on those bosses, if you die on the very last percentage, you just lose so much time, because the bosses have so much HP, so if you die in the very last percentage, you can't just engage them on low percent, right? They heal back up to 100% HP, you need to walk back and engage them again, losing so much time.
Yeah, and once again, all they need to do is make sure is that they clear all of the mushrooms up before the boss does his next cast at 100 energy, and it looks like they're almost already cleared the room before the upheaval went out, clearing the rest of the mushrooms. They have no mushrooms left after this boss frontal hits. Very clean run from them. This boss should be pretty easy after this point.
Yeah, very well played by them. We also see JB, of course, do as much damage as possible in that cat form with the feral affinity. Now, the boss is going down. At this point, they only have 9% trash to kill. They do have to trigger the reaping to be able to access the last boss. You need to kill 100% trash to actually reach the last boss. So in some other dungeons, we see them skip the last reaping wave, but it's not possible here in Underrot.
And of course, we see them moving on after killing the third boss. They only have 9% more trash to proc their last reaping wave. And then, of course, they'll move on to the final boss, where once again, they'll plan on pulling the 5th reaping wave into the boss. They're going to be pulling 3 corruptors into one of the heads here, and they need to make sure that they lock down that one head.
Yeah, so they actually pulled one head in the back, which I'm not sure if that was a mistake, because now they have 2 heads active.
They're just going to CC it.
Yeah, that will work, true. Yeah, that will work. They can just get out of combat with it afterwards. But yeah, as you said, they were pulling 3 corruptors on top of this worm. Now, this is scary because, as I said, like, the worm does not move. It's stationary. While the tentacles just spawn around them, dealing so much damage if you get hit by them, while the worm actually needs to be interrupted, because he constantly casts an ability that, if it goes through, it hits the whole group for a magic debuff that does initial damage and also leaves behind a dot that ticks for a lot. But we saw, of course, all the interrupts were successful, and none of the casts went through.
The important thing to mention is that they have a lot of get-out-of-jail free cards here. If they get really bad targeted maddening gaze cast, they can knock them back through both the Ring of Peace and JB's knockback too. So they have plenty of ways to save themselves if they get a really, really bad set of casts. But it looks like they haven't had to use any of them so far.
Yeah, so after these mobs, they will get 100% trash. They will be able to access the last boss room. And how this works is that once the players teleport down, the reaping will actually follow them. It will teleport on top of them. And again, they will just make use of this unholy DK, just having this AoE and getting the faster might stacks, getting more strength for more DPS. Now, they don't have their bloodlust ready, so this boss is going to take a while. And again, they don't have a rest. So if something happens here, it's going to cost them.
Yeah, you have to expect that they're planning on playing very, very safe here, which is weird because they probably had the option to shadow meld this extra reaping, but I think they're comfortable enough in this dungeon, with it being one of the first dungeons they practice for time trials, where they know that they can pull this pull off pretty consistently without having to worry about any deaths. We do see the Unholy Decay doing quite a bit of damage, not as much as you would expect from an Unholy Decay. They might have actually shadow melded some of the extra reaping just to play it safer, because we usually see Unholy pop a little bit higher here. But once again, they know they can pull these pulls off. This is one of their most practiced dungeons. Yeah,
to be fair, as you mentioned, they're so far ahead at this point. At least I would have liked them to play the Reaping Wave by itself, right? But Shakib does get more damage from the faster might, so maybe just, as you said, they just practice it so much. And for the extra damage that Shakib gets, they are pulling it on top, and it worked out really well. They killed all the Reaping so far, so now they only have the boss abilities left to deal with, which, of course, you see those spores spawning around them, which, if you get hit by them, they will explode, leave those paddles behind, and also do damage, so you don't want to get hit by them. But they don't have a lot of HP, so any AoE ability like a Thunderclap or something like that will just get rid of them.
And we should also mention that this boss's HP bar works a lot differently from other boss's HP bars. This boss's HP bar is actually its energy bar. Whenever you fill the boss's energy bar to 100%, he spawns 2 blood visages. Once you kill those blood visages, the boss takes 1/6 of his health in damage, and that means you need to kill 6 bloods to finish the boss off. So 3 full energy bars, and then the boss finishes.
Yeah, and those blood visages, you don't even have to kill them, because you have a friendly NPC here to help you out that kills it for you. Now, on the very last set of blood visages that spawn, of course, you want to switch damage to them, but otherwise you just want to keep hitting the boss, so more of those blood visages spawn.
So 2 energy bars down for Method Dene. They only need to make sure they fill up 1 more of them. They need to make sure that they're kiting around the room here, making sure they're not filling up too many of these spots with these boss frontals. And it looks like what they're doing is they're moving the boss forward and then turning around behind him so that he spews out all of this gray goo to where it already was, so that it'll bounce even further away from them, which is pretty smart. positioning from there.
Exactly. So he does cast his frontal where he targets a player, right? So if one player is out of position and he stands on the other side of the boss, then he will cover the room pretty much with those gray pools, which not only do the damage to you if you stand in them, but also slow you, so they're very annoying to deal with. And of course, one more ability from this boss is just the AoE damage, the AoE debuff that the healer has to deal with. But JB has an easy job doing it, as he does 10k DPS on top of healing the group as well.
Method NA with a very impressive Underrot run, sealing their
honestly produce a boss level mob out of this bolstering.
Yeah, we do see two different strats coming in from both of those teams. Abrakeydabra deciding to pull something at the very start. We see the CCs coming in from the Devil Rogues here to seeing the higher HP mobs, while they kill off those laborers who just have way less HP to not bolster the high HP ones. They do use the blind and the steps in the back and just outrange it.
Abrakeydabra doing well to kind of stomp the first of the packs here. A bit of a more dangerous pull here for Method NA on the right, but nonetheless, they do manage to off it completely. Now, there are a few mobs, and we'll see them later, especially the mech jockeys, that are quite dangerous to the immediate melee DPS around them. It's not even just about the tank being in range, but they will just do spot damage with their grease gun on random targets. And as you mentioned earlier, Nagura, definitely these peacekeepers that we see at the bottom of the screen for Method NA, something to really look out for.
Yeah, so we said JB actually dying here. We were sitting there and they got the quaking on top of it. But of course they are out of combat, so Ladi is able to just rest him back up and they can continue. But this is costing them time, 5 seconds from the death, and of course the rest timer that they need as well.
Yeah, so I believe they shadow melded there to get rid of that peacekeeper. The shadow melded just a bit too close together, couldn't move out of it, so they kind of had to clip a little too many quakings for JB's comfort level. Ended up dropping there. Didn't have to use the battle res, as you mentioned, just because, well, they didn't even have one available. He was the one who could battle res. Peacekeeper being pulled here along with one of these thugs. These thugs, very tanky mobs, and they do buff themselves with Vaporize. That does an increased amount of damage should they get a successful cast off. But dangerously to the rest of the group, Negro, they do charge far party members.
Yeah, so a random member can get targeted by this charge, which does do a lot of damage. On top of course, if they have the enrage buff on them and it's not being interrupted or dispelled by JB with Soothe, then the charge is going to do even more damage. And we've seen some big pulls where they pull a couple of thugs together. So if their charges are lined up and they do it at the same time and they actually cast it in the same member, then you can get one shot by that ability.
This is a pretty scary pull here with the triple Peacekeeper as well, thugs, and there's an assassin there too. Definitely want to be interrupting those flechettes from the assassin. You need a hard CC on that too. It's not something you can just kick, so you need a stun, a displace, disorient, whatever it may be. So they have to, they do well there to interrupt the flechettes right now. Moving out of that AoE zone nerf, making sure he doesn't get disoriented. Those are laid down by the Peacekeepers, of course, as they try to scramble and kill these mobs at around the same time, but a lot of damage coming in on nerf as he desperately tries to leap away, chunking down to 20% constantly and kiting around in circles within this house. Has to be careful not to line of sight JB here.
Yeah, all those mobs, of course, if they bolster, the tank is obviously not able to tank them anymore, just need to start kiting. But I think the bigger problem with bolstering these mobs is not only that they do more damage to the tank, because he can kite and just avoid the damage, but they just get more HP and it's just more damage that they need to kill them. It's just more inefficiency and just takes more time to do.
Yeah, sometimes pulling less is certainly more efficient in the realm of bolstering. So taking a Method NA quite a bit of time here to grind through the rest of this pack. Abrakeydabra has already gotten up to 28%, dealt with his first round of reaping, just finishing up the rest of it right now. A lot of high HP mobs in the form of those Peacekeepers that spawn in as lost souls with 50% of that base HP, now starting to move through the rest of the trash. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to see the majority of the trash being cleared before we even get to the second boss.
Yeah, so those Peacekeepers are not always active from the get-go. We see some of them patrolling around and you can pull them just like that, but there's a lot of Peacekeeper who are actually just inactive. And what is going to happen is if you engage with a mech jockey, they're going to try to run to the nearest Peacekeeper and are going to activate the mech activator or something like that, and if it is successful, they will jump into the Peacekeeper, they will activate the Peacekeeper, and then you can damage it and kill it. Now this is what most people do, because if you get the Peacekeeper activated, not only do you get the percentage from killing the Peacekeeper, which is a lot of percentage, but you also get the extra percentage from the mech jockey if you damage the mech jockey somehow before they jump into the Peacekeeper.
Yeah, so definitely a bit of extra bonus there for the players that are taking advantage of that. 42% here for Abrakeydabra as they they spawn their second Reaping Wave, grouping it all together, allowing a bit of breather for both the tank and the healer. Of course, these don't follow bolstering mechanics. They do pull one of the thugs in there just to be able to effectively cleave it down. We do know how frankly inefficient it is to just deal with a Reaping Wave alone. We don't see that too often this tournament. Jay dipping quite low here as well. No problem though for Elstrat just to heal him back up. Divine Field well topped off at 100%. MOTHERLOAD now has dealt as well with their first Reaping Wave, getting the next pull in and getting ready for their 40% round.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra already on their second Reaping Wave. Now, they will stay in this room or in this area for a long time up until the first boss. So at this point, the only difference we can see between the groups is the trash percentage. Now, it is approximately 10% difference between those two groups. And this is quite big in this dungeon because there's so much trash that you need to kill a lot of trash to actually get the percentage. And it's going to take a long time, especially with Bolstering and those high HP Peacekeepers. So Abrakeydabra doing a much better job at handling this trash, especially just dealing with this bolstering and not losing too much time at bolstering those big peacekeepers.
Yeah, there is a high amount of trash density in this dungeon. It almost feels like the dungeon naturally has teaming in it just by the sheer amount of mobs that you do need to kill. So you can imagine on teaming weeks just how much you actually need to kill. Fortunately, we don't have teaming here in this dungeon for them right now. Abrakeydabra is still struggling to kill and everything equally here on the side. Both teams at about 10% in their respective packs right now. Triple Peacekeeper up on the side of MOTHERLOAD again as Nerf leaps away, making sure he gets out of there before he gets smacked in the face by the low thugs and Triple Peacekeeper hits.
Now, I wonder one thing, if because the last time we saw these two teams play against each other in MOTHERLOAD, MOTHERLOAD and Abrakeydabra were really close to one another, but they actually had this one extra Reaping skip at the very end, MOTHERLOAD, that just saved them so much time compared to Abrakeydabra strat. Now, I wonder if Abrakeydabra actually saw Method strat and actually adapts to it, because it's very easy to adapt and it just saves them so much time.
The vendor and the jockey getting sapped, double sapped rather, here for Abrakeydabra, making sure that they don't summon the mech just yet until they kill the other mobs. Don't want to bolster that. And frankly, the vendors are just a pain in the butt to deal with. They do a lot of casts that need to be interrupted, including a Cola Refreshment cast that will heal non-dispellable, might I add, not that any teams have dispel in the first place right now, but non-dispellable heal on one of the enemies, making it much more difficult to deal with, especially in this bolstering sense. Elstrat getting down to 2% HP there, manages to barely hang on as he heals himself up. They'll need to be quickly spread out for this Quake Pulse. A bit unstable here for Abrakeydabra, so hopefully they can hold that together as MOTHERLOAD rifled through 51% of the trash, getting ready to spawn their Reaping, but Shakib takes a huge hit, probably one of the grease guns in there from the jockeys.
Yeah, this is a very dangerous pull from Abrakeydabra here. Not only do they pull the Reaping, but they also pull a lot of trash on top of this Reaping. Now, the one thing that almost made Elstrat die was one of the assassins actually getting his deadly poison off. It's a cast that is interruptible and that you have to interrupt, because if it goes off, then all the abilities and all the melee attacks are actually going to apply a stacking poison debuff. And you see Elstrat actually going down here without a Battle Rush being available, of course.
Yeah, fortunately, it's just with 2 mobs left that have barely any HP. Now, it is a deceiving amount of HP because of the bolstering stacks that those 2 mobs have, but fortunately they are able to kill them off. Dr. J did get his cheat death consumed on that previous danger that they just had. Elstrat now being off-resed by Swagfist, the Windwalker Monk, on Abrakeydabra. The third Reaping Wave has now procced for MOTHERLOAD, which is facing the room of the first boss, but I'm not sure if they're going to do a bit more percent before getting to him.
Most definitely. There's one more thing to note, that Abrakeydabra is just very lucky right now, because Waycrest was casting the Resurrect on Elstrat, and they did get the Quaking on the very last second, just barely not interrupting his rest. So lucky by Team Abrakeydabra here, not losing too much time from this healer dying. But I do believe, as you said, they will just do a little bit more trash and probably wait for the Bloodlust to be ready and then engage the boss fight with the Bloodlust.
JB doing well there to typhoon the 2 Gravebolt casters from the Reaping Wave back into the pile of mobs, which are just sitting innocently nuking random members of the raid by themselves. So I want to get everything in there and cleave it down together. Finally, the 3rd Reaping Wave does go down for MOTHERLOAD as they rear and U-turn back into the kind of pile of trash, getting ready to do some more percent. Abrakeydabra now on 67%, so the field's kind of been evened out a bit. The trash percentage isn't that high in favor of Abrakeydabra anymore, and they have a death on the board. But if I'm not mistaken, we just had another death from Lighty as I was speaking. 2nd death there for MOTHERLOAD right now.
Yeah, so 2 versus 1 death. We see Abrakeydabra actually engaging the boss without their Brothers being ready. So they either just pop it later into the fight, or they pop it for the trash later on. Now this boss here does do have some abilities that you need to watch out for. We just saw this pulse that knocks everyone back and leaves a debuff behind everyone that does ticking damage. And of course we saw the frontal here as well.
So the key here is that the boss will launch 3-foot bombs, essentially, that randomly around the room. The players will need to redirect them before they explode back into the boss. Every one that hits the boss will make him take 50% increased damage for, I believe, a 20-second debuff, and it does stack to 3. So the trick here is to get the first 2 in right away, and then get the third one in just as the debuff's about to wear off, so that you extend the debuff to its maximum allowed time, and then refresh it for that extra damage intake as well. Spreading out here for the quaking, and you can see that they're kiting the boss away from these coin gold piles, as the boss will try to grab the coins and increase his damage done permanently for the rest of the encounter by 10%.
Yes, of course, he's dragging the boss around now. One thing they can also do with the boss is, because you probably have the healer move to the bombs and put them into the boss to get this damage increase, because you don't want the melees to walk away from the boss and lose damage. Now, one thing you can do is actually move the boss into the bombs instead of having someone throw them in, which means you lose even less damage, because even the healer can DPS. But we see Atal'Dazar just walking around, throwing in those bombs, losing a little bit of damage, but he can handle it.
He actually just barely missed that third bomb for a second. It landed right beside the tank. So unfortunately for them, kind of showing their lack of soccer skills in the EU prowess. You'd expect an EU team to do better than that, but nonetheless, they do manage to get the third one in. Another death from Lighty coming up, 74% on the board. We'll have to see how this NA team fares in the soccer ball kicking here for the boss, but 3 deaths on the board now for them. That's going to start costing them in the long run, especially against a team that's looking quite well polished right now in Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra doing so well. They almost downed the boss here at 77% trash. That means they're actually, not only are they ahead almost a whole boss fight, but they're also 3% ahead in trash. So Abrakeydabra doing so much better than MOTHERLOAD now. With, you know, MOTHERLOAD having some of those problems with a death here and there, just costing them time, right?
And costing them time, and you know, we keep visiting the same fact. It's not just the 5 seconds that goes on the board, it's the amount of time spent rezzing the player, it's the amount of damage lost as whatever they die to is still being cleaned up by the remaining 4 members of the team. Abrakeydabra has downed the first boss, moving on towards the second boss here. A lot of trash once again remaining between here and the next boss, but I assume they're going to be picking up most of, minus the 100% trash mark, of course, before engaging the second boss.
Now this trash here is very dangerous, and we've seen some other teams go ahead and let the rogues see the Earth Scrapers and only pull the Mind Rest, because they do have less HP, and it is dangerous to bolster the Earth Scrapers because they just do so much damage to the group and to the tank. But we see Abrakeydabra just pulling down on top of the Mind Rest, just making sure they have this focus damage on the Earth Scrapers to make sure they're not getting bolstered and just handling it very well.
Earth Shaper's very, very scary mob here for the tanks. They do use their Bloodlust on this really large pull here. Now, the Earth Shapers, they do have that Earth Shield that they can cast on some of the other enemies. Usually not too much of concern in terms of offensive dispels, but they don't have that luxury here. But you have to save some interrupts for their Rock Lance that you can see casting right there. They interrupted last second. Extremely dangerous for the tank if you hit them. Now, you can reflect one. It is a magic cast, but several hitting you at the same time can honestly just topple a tank immediately. 10% left for coin-operated Crowd Pummeler for MOTHERLOAD there on the side, after which I would expect them as well to start working their way up towards the second boss.
Yeah, you see Abrakeydabra doing a double pull again here with Earth Shapers and those Sappers, which explode on low HP, which is actually not very good if you have Bolstering, right? Because the Sappers just cast the explosion and just pretty much kill themselves, meaning that they will put a Bolstering stack on all the other mobs. So you need to try to focus the Sappers a little bit less compared to the Earth Shapers, of course, because they just don't kill themselves compared to the other mobs.
Earth Shield going off here again. We get that Typhoon with Vortex combo out of Elsarat there, kind of mocking an AoE grip off a DK just to make sure he gets the interrupts. Final Blast going off from the Sappers, well done by them to make sure those are the last remaining mobs, so that once they kill themselves, there is nothing else that they're going to bolster, making their lives more difficult. 94% on the board for Abrakeydabra. Probably moving up to the second boss very shortly here as they skip most of this trash with the double Rogue Shroud as needed. And MOTHERLOAD only now starting to work on the trash that Abrakeydabra is pretty much just finished.
Yeah, so the last time these guys played against each other, it was so much closer. I think this is the showcase of Bolstering, right? We saw Method NA not really having any big wipes or any problems with the trash. I think the biggest problem they just had was losing so much time on Bolstering, just having a couple of bolster stacks on the Peacekeepers, just giving them so much more HP, needing more time to kill them, having one death here, one death there, just everything accumulated just makes them be so much more behind compared to Abrakeydabra that they're already in the third boss here.
Azeroth here has been pulled.
Second, sorry.
Well, who's counting anyway? Abrakeydabra has been pulled here. Abrakeydabra has pulled Azeroth here, the second boss of the dungeon. Now, he does start with 4 of these Earth Ragers around him, which will fixate players, and should they melee them, do an increasing bleed stack on them. So you're seeing the players kind of kite in a circle around the boss here to maximize cleave efficiency on top of Azeroth. He does do a tectonic smash, frontal cone that will stun you and do a fair bit of damage should it hit you. Once you kill the initial 4 mobs, you will spawn 1 mob periodically, 1 more rock elemental, stone elemental, the earth gazer, and periodically empower them as well, meaning they can no longer be CC'd, but they do increase damage, but also take a ton of increased damage, so you want to focus those down quickly, Negura.
Yeah, so of course you want to kill them fast, or you kite them as we see them doing here, because of course they're 3 melee players and also kind of being a melee DPS too if he wants to do damage in cat form. So they can't really focus them because one of them is actually fixated and can't go close. If they hit you, you do get a bleed DUF that does stack and does do a lot of damage, especially in a tyrannical setting. So what they want to do is just kite the boss in a circle while being out of range of the melees hitting you, of the melee that's hitting you, but them still be able to AoE them with their AoE abilities.
Azeroth now having some trash combined with it for Abrakeydabra, some of the trash that they prior pulled on top. Now, bosses can bolster, let's keep that in mind, so they have to be careful not to kill that trash before Azeroth dies. I'm sure they've practiced this a million times, so they know exactly the percentage that they usually pull at as to not kind of run that risk, but they'll pay close attention to it, making sure that is not the case, and Azeroth is falling quite fast at 13%. Method NA not far behind. They are starting to kind of climb up the hill to Azeroth, but right now they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. So we see Abrakeydabra actually adapting their strategy to Method and A strat. So this is actually interesting to see because Abrakeydabra was not doing this the last time around, but it was Method and A that beat Abrakeydabra exactly in this dungeon, and Method and A playing this exact strat. Now we see Swagfist dying, but the boss is dead as well. They do have a Battle Res available to them, which they can use, but it's only 1 mob left that they have to finish off, so maybe they just choose not to. But yeah, Abrakeydabra beating Method and A with their own strategy here.
Yeah, I mean, interesting to see. Elsrat goes down as well, and Swagfist got rocked in the face earlier. They will not use the battle res right now because there's just a couple of mobs left.
He actually respawn here too. So.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why he's not releasing. That is a good point. The checkpoint is now here since they've downed Azeroth. Perhaps some internet issues on the side of Swagfist. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens there. We did just see another death go down on Method and A. Battle res was used immediately, so they'll have 1 less battle res until about 3 more minutes. They'll have their second charge come up. 4:30 left on their Bloodlust as well, but they have a lot to chew through right now in the form of Azeroth.
Yeah, this boss of Tyrannical just takes so much time, so it will take them a while to catch up to Abrakeydabra, but their Windwalker just not being there, having probably disconnect issues, is obviously going to cost them a lot because with only 2 DPS, everything else is going to take you a lot longer, specifically because there's only the bosses left, right? Abrakeydabra actually only didn't proc the Reaping, which we saw Method NA doing last time around. So Method NA did proc the Reaping, skipped all the way to the next boss and Shadow melted there, but we see Abrakeydabra actually needing a little bit of percentage to proc that last Reaping here.
Yeah, they do have that CC blinded mob there, the Earth Shaper, that they're just kind of dancing around looking at. They're probably trying to figure out exactly what they want to do with their kind of unlucky, unfortunate situation with Swagfist not being able to res yet, just for whatever reason that may be. So they're probably considering whether or not we take on this final Reaping pack as a 4 group or we just go ahead. Method and A, though, starting to catch up and close some ground here. Azeroth reaching 35% for them in just a moment, doing well to dodge that tectonic smash. And at this point, it's just, you know, once you deal with the initial part of this boss, the rest of it is really quite simple once all the ads are done. It's really just kill the boss, Forehead.
Definitely. Now we see Method and A also be at 94%, which was the exact percentage Abrakeydabra has been at. So now we see as well them, of course, doing their own strategy, engaging with this pack with the mini boss, which actually is a very annoying pack to deal with. Usually, it does make sense for them to pull it here to proc this reaping, but normally when you play this dungeon in live service, you don't really want to engage this pack because of this mini boss just casting the ability cover, which pretty much makes all the mobs around him redirect the damage to him, and him taking, I believe it's 70% less damage taken. So it's very inefficient to pull this pack unless you have really good control and drag the mobs around the mini boss or away from the mini boss when he casts cover.
Round and round they go. Fortunately, Swagfist has indeed reconnected. There was a bit of a DC issue for them, but they have reconnected and are now full strength. 100% is on the board as they've procced the reaping and have run immediately down the hill, getting ready to get in the third boss's room and using that shadow meld immediately to just kind of drop aggro on all the trash that they ran by, including the reaping wave that they just spawned as well. So they get right into the thick of things here with Rixa, Flux Flame, a particularly dangerous boss for tanks, as all of her damage is fire-based. A lot of physical that you can't mitigate. Now there are some advantages to the Prot Warrior here. For every 2 chemicals that she throws out is always on the closest to proximity targets, so you can bait who they go on, and the Prot Warrior can spell reflect one of those every other wave.
Yeah, and then of course, since there's 2 debuffs, 2 magic debuffs, only one of them can be dispelled by the healer, because of course every successful dispel triggers a cooldown on the healer. So you want to make sure it either gets spell reflect, so the healer can dispel the other one, or it gets cloaked, or a big defensive cooldown is being used. So whoever you want the debuff to be on needs to be the closest target to the boss to get this debuff on them.
So the general mechanic of the fight outside of those abilities, of course, Flux Flame will cast that kind of Azurite pool on the ground, targeted near players' locations. 2 rounds of that for every 1 round of Propellant Blast. The Propellant Blast will push the pools off of the edges of the platform, so you want to bait them in proper areas, and the Propellant Blast will also target a player. So you can definitely target those in the direction of the pools you just threw down, so that you don't run out of space on the platform. You can see them doing well there to remove 1 half of it, and likely will bait the other half. Per one of these cycles, Propellant Blast, you will have a couple rounds, of course, of the debuffs that we talked about. Outside of that is just heavy tank damage, so you'll see a lot of Ignore Pain spam from the Warrior. Nothing they can really mitigate with block too much, and they'll just be kiting in and out of those pools. That's why they're so localized to one area of the platform.
Yeah, and we can see Atal'Dazar not doing that much damage on this boss because he needs to heal this tank constantly, and this is one indicator of seeing how badly a healer needs to heal, because of course if there's nothing to heal, a healer wants to min-max as much damage as possible, and by Atal'Dazar just doing 3k DPS, that means the tank definitely needs a lot of healing here.
So down to 14% now. MOTHERLOAD has also pulled the boss not too long ago, already down to 50%. So a lot of damage coming out of them over there on the smaller screen. Bloodlust is now coming up for MOTHERLOAD in 3 seconds. Doubt they will use it on this boss at this point, of course. Abrakeydabra still has 25 seconds to go on their Bloodlust, and Rixa's about to fall here in just a moment. We'll see a quite predictable skip of all of the trash leading up to the final boss's room. They're just going to run past everything, just kind of mass meld as much as they can. A rogue cloak through everything as much as they can, and then use their shadow meld at the end when they are ready to drop aggro quite far into the boss's room. They certainly don't want to proxy aggro any of the bombs along the outside. Method now at 20% on Rixa.
Yeah, so this is actually pretty close now with the unfortunate events for Abrakeydabra. I just want to shout out that they did a really good job dealing with the situation, because as we talked about earlier, they were only a 99% trash, and they were in the space of mind to see this Earthshaper to not proc the Reaping and waiting for their Windwalker to be back. If they would have triggered the Reaping, then they couldn't have done the skip without their Monk, of course, because then he couldn't have been rested. He was not able to come back with all the Reaping to skip. So them seeing the Earthshaper waiting for the Monk to come back and then killing the Earthshaper was a very good idea and very good choice by Abrakeydabra here.
Definitely a very nice patient play from them. Mogul Razdunk, the final boss of the dungeon here, is a 2-phase fight. So you'll have phase 1 at from 100 to 50 as well. A bit of trouble here. I'm just going to interrupt that for a moment as NA finally gets through, but Lighty getting quite low as well. And there's a Quaking about to go off, so it does finish him off, as we do know that Quaking hits for 20% of your max HP. He was down to 15% there, so the death was almost inevitable. Shakib did proc his cheat death as well, so a bit sloppy there from MOTHERLOAD, but they are getting the res up and getting ready to pull the boss. But back to the main boss, the last boss fight here that we see from Abrakeydabra. At 50%, we will trigger trigger the kind of phase 2 or transition phase where the boss will rise up in the air, getting immune to all damage, and 2 mobs will spawn Nagur on the sides of the platform.
Yeah, so on this main phase, as we can see here, there's 3 very dangerous abilities to look out for. It's this Gatling gun that does get casted on the tank's position, and then will either go clockwise or counterclockwise, which you have to be very careful about. Of course, you don't want to get hit by this since it does do a lot of damage onto Rethinking. And then we have the missile, which will target or prefer range players. So Atal'Dazar will pretty much get targeted by every single missile. He needs to make sure he goes away from the boss, making sure that it hits him away, so the melees don't have to walk away from the boss and can continue to do damage.
So here we see, just as mentioned, the 2 Sky Scorchers spawn. They are brought it together immediately, and they just want to cleave them down as quickly as they can. These Azerite Heartseekers can actually be intercepted by other players, but will leave a 35% healing debuff on you. So the tank taking both of them, not always the best idea, but somebody will need to kind of help distribute some of the damage as they make sure to bait the boss's crash down on top of these pillars right now with the drill smash. They have to get through 3 of them in order for that shield to shatter.
Yeah, once the shield shatters, the boss will go back into his normal phase. As we can see here, the shield getting removed. Now, one more thing to watch out here in this normal phase is those moonbots on the side. They will change direction, as we can see them flying around on the side of the room right here. Once they got their final position, they will do a frontal cast of missiles, pretty much, that you need to dodge. And as we can see here, the group is in a safe position. Now, you need to make sure to drag the boss into a safe area of those missiles, because if you drag him too late and he casts a Gatling gun, then of course the boss does not move.
Yeah, so tanks definitely need to pre-move. You can certainly imagine the platform as a 3x3 grid, and there's always going to be 1 row and 1 column filled by the fire of those robots that go over to the side, more or less. So you want to find yourself in the safe spaces of that area. But it looks like Abrakeydabra is ready to finish off the boss here. They've already completed their last wave of reaping, and they're going to dominantly take this first game over Method NA. But certainly Method NA is not done just yet.
There it is, taking down the last boss here, Abrakeydabra, even with the small DC issue that they had to overcome.
Rogue does provide advantage in giving you the minimal amount of options, at least in what terms of trash you skip, but there's really not that much you can skip in this dungeon. So the kind of time you can start to make up is really having more aggressive offensive pulls, something that Method NA certainly had space for last time. We know they 2-pulled the second boss room and 2-pulled the dervishes, of course, in the, the 3rd boss room. So we'll see if they adjust that to a 1-pull here.
Yes, we see Method NA doing a pretty huge pull here, and we see one thing to note, JB is actually running Tree of Life. Now, we saw Sours mention that JB is actually a very big fan of cultivation and doesn't like Tree of Life very much, but we've seen all the other residues pretty much exclusively running that talent in this dungeon, specifically because of those big pulls coming in and just this fortified trash being so dangerous. And now we see JB running this Tree of Life too.
Yeah, so I mean, that is quite indicative that they will be looking to do some really large pulls here. Tree of Life has already come out of JB, just faded off him as he goes back into kitty form, and helps to cleave down the rest of the trash prior to pulling Atal'Dazar and Affix right here. Now, we are back in a volcanic setting along with Grievous here, so once Grievous gets going below 90% on one of the party members, it will start to take more and more not frequently, but it will start to take harder up to a maximum of 4 stacks. Volcanic Nagur, of course, not really too much of a concern for them, but the more mobs you pull, the more plumes you will have to dodge depending on your proximity to the mobs.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra, a pretty big significant pull that they used Bloodlust on. Now, on the side of Method NA, they actually saved their Bloodlust. Now, we've seen some teams before save their Bloodlust, not used it at all in this first boss room, and just used it in a second boss room to do a very large pull, which we might see coming out of Method NA after this first boss fight here.
Yeah, a bit scary because that also locks you into not having Bloodlust available for the 3rd boss's room, and those dervishes can really pack a punch when you pull all 6 of them, so we'll see if they can handle that. JB certainly no stranger to this dungeon. If I'm not mistaken, got a couple of the high key world first, pushing through Tempros Sethraliss, so he's definitely quite comfortable healing Galvast on the third boss encounter in this dungeon, and those dervishes that come with him prior to the boss spawning. Now, about this fight though, Atal'Dazar and Affix, one of the bosses, always starting with Affix, will have Lightning Shield present on them, so if anybody does any direct damage to them during this phase, they will have quite a bit of damage reflected back onto them.
Definitely. So you want to make sure, of course, that you're not accidentally hitting the lightning shield. You do have a timer to see when the lightning shield switches. So just to be sure, a couple of seconds before the lightning shield switches, you want to make sure to stop damaging that boss, because on top of all the other abilities from this boss fight, it might be very deadly. As we see the lightning shield switching here, Atal'Dazar being active again. Now, Atal'Dazar does have some very deadly mechanics that you do have to watch out for, which like the Cyclone Strike, as we've just seen, which will target one random member and cast a cone of cyclones towards him. So they need to make sure to dodge out of their way. And then there's one more ability from Affix, once he has the lightning shield actually, that we saw in Underrot, which is this big circle that after a while does a lot of damage to him, and we of course saw the static shock with a huge AoE.
So no shock here that Abrakeydabra is behind on killing the boss, as they did opt to do a larger amount of trash, including that first reaping wave prior to Aspix, killing Aspix and Adrix, the first pair of snake bosses here. MOTHERLOAD stealthing right through and grabbing that first Krag'wa rider. Now the room we see behind them, of course, is the second boss room, so really curious to see here whether they're going to pull the whole room, pop Tree of Life, and pop everything to stay alive. A couple of leftover smaller pull mobs right before they likely get to the big action in the room. Abrakeydabra as well now has killed the first boss and is moving through this arrow gauntlet bridge.
Yeah, so MOTHERLOAD just did a shroud skip here, and it reminded me of BlizzCon actually, because MOTHERLOAD was playing against previous Method PogChamp, where Elsrite and Jay were in this team. They were playing against each other in exactly this dungeon, and they didn't manage one of those skips, MOTHERLOAD, and losing so much time, but ended up winning anyway, because the former Method PogChamp actually had a full team wipe on the last boss. So let's hope both of these teams play a little bit cleaner this time around and don't have those huge mistakes and those huge wipes coming in.
I'm sure those are horribly suppressed and bottled memories that they have and will in no way come out later in the future. MOTHERLOAD now at 26%. Trash as well has dealt with their first reaping wave. Pretty large pull coming up here from Abrakeydabra. Doesn't look like they're committing to the full room pull, however. A lot of frontals in the form of Noxious Breath coming from those Krag'wa riders. There's two of them. Quite dangerous mobs, deal a lot of damage, will dismount around 50%, and then start casting lightning shields along with cleaves. Looking like we're getting the whole room pull coming out of MOTHERLOAD here. Something we did not see from them earlier in the tournament, but they've committed this time.
Yeah, so they have used their bloodlust here. As we said, they saved their bloodlust for exactly this pull. The Tree of Life coming out of JB here. They pulled the whole boss room together. Now this is very scary because we've seen teams before doing this, like the team Puolukka, but they did have the Mooncoin for the tree. For the trees coming out and tanking them, which they don't, of course, have available to them here in MOTHERLOAD. So they have to. The tank just keeps kiting as you see him dropping so low from having all those mobs hit him. The Ring of Peace coming out to make sure Nerf is safe, and of course all those just poison debuffs from the mobs applying on like the whole group.
Yeah, that's actually part of the major danger here. It's not even the tank damage, it's a lot of the venomous spit that goes out on random members. We have electrified scales getting well interrupted there on the side for MOTHERLOAD. Don't want any reflective damage, because as soon as these players start to dip too low, then Grievous is just going to take over and it's going to make JB's life a living nightmare. It's already hard for him to expend the global cooldown just to even dispel some of the poisons off the players, so there's just a lot of damage going through. Nonetheless, they do hold on, manage to pull the full room pull off, trying to get Lighty desperately out of that max 4-stack Grievous above 90% HP, and they cleave the 40% down, the Reaping Wave for 40% down. Looks like they're not going to pull it with the boss. I think they need to, okay, JK. They do pull the boss as well. No breather for JB needed, and they're just going to go right into it.
Yeah, this was a very crucial moment for MOTHERLOAD, because this pull, the Reaping spawns in the middle of this pull. As you can see, they have 50% trash. So after 40%, they got the Reaping Wave, and they still have to kill off 10% of the trash. But the boss does not spawn until all the mobs are dead. But you also have all these Reaping mobs on top of the normal mobs, right? So MOTHERLOAD needs to make sure that they're actually focusing the actual mobs and not the Reaping ones, because they want the boss to spawn, and they want to engage him while having the Reaping still up.
So we just have Merektha spawn now, the second boss for Abrakeydabra. So certainly, once again, I mean, we've seen it a few times before. They did a 2 pull for the room. It cost them a lot of time. It was safer. They didn't have Bloodlust available, but now they're behind. Merektha has gone downstairs. Apparently there's stairs in this room, by the way. Has gone underground, and JB does run over, jumps on top of the egg, and is getting ready to pull one of those agitated Nimbus over.
Yeah, so the Nimbus is pretty scary to pull on top, especially in a fortified setting, but as long as you interrupt them up and you make sure that you heal away the AoE, you're going to be fine. We're probably going to see a Elstrat do the same thing if he hasn't already pulled it. And we see the percentage now for Abrakeydabra, they're actually on 55%, while Method NA is on 50%. Now, they are a little bit behind on the boss HP, of course, but this extra charge percentage that they have means they're actually kind of even at this point.
Yeah, and it is a bit more flexible on where they want to proc the reaping now. I assume we'll still see the 60% reaping for both teams in Galvast room, the third boss room, but they'll likely have to pull 1 or 2 less mobs, making it a bit less dangerous. So maybe they too will be able to commit to a full 6 Dervish pull without having to add an extra either Nimbus or Caster later on. 53% on the board for Method NA as they start the final phase of Merektha, the second boss in here. The boss has now combined both Poison and Blinding Sand abilities, wanting to make sure you move out of that Noxious Breath and then keep moving so that that pulse that goes on right there doesn't get you trapped with the Knot of Snakes and make you take for a lot of damage. Blinding Sand easy, of course. You just want to turn around for the boss before the cast finishes so you don't get disoriented.
Yeah, so this last phase is actually the most dangerous fight of this boss combat, and it's also very important to note that on a tyrannical setting and high keys in general, you need to make sure that you kill this last phase very fast. Now we see Swagfist dying Abraceydabra's side, just as I mentioned how difficult this boss fight is, but I do believe it was because of the Nimbus being up on top of everything else.
Ashine getting quite low as well, really having a lot of trouble getting out of these 4 stacks. Elstrat, a couple of people were still taking down their Divine Field, still hovering around 50% HP, down to 24 now. A lot of damage coming in for him. Elstrat is really struggling to get over that 90% threshold to get out of that Grievous, especially with all of the snake poison damage coming in on top of the boss himself. Jay has now dipped down into the 4 stack as well. So Elstrat certainly has his work cut out for him. They are in the final phase, but 30% is still quite a bit, even in this kind of fortified setting here. Method NA has scooched on ahead and has done the full 6 Dervish pull as well, with Tree of Life coming out from JB.
So we actually saw both Ashine and Dr. J getting hit by the Blinding Sand, so they did not turn around, actually got disoriented, but since they're rogues, they actually managed to survive. But we see both Swagfist and Divine Field drop so low, and the boss is on 7% HP, while they have all these adds up what they have to deal with, just spawning those sands, and Dr. J going down. They do not have a battle rest ready. Now they just have to try to finish off the boss so they can get Dr. J back up, and they have to kite the boss around, and there we go. So they did manage to kill the boss, but it was a struggle.
I hope somebody can write the good doctor prescription for that death. He should be able to release here as the tech point has been reached with Merektha's death. Everybody finally healthy and above 90% threshold. All eyes now on Method NA on the right side as they still struggle to finish off the rest of this Dervish pull. A bit of sloppiness with the kiting, unfortunately, from Nerf, but it is quite difficult. You want to make sure you keep those Dervishes as close together as possible, and the only way they move, based on this team comp, is blinking to their current active target. Lighty does go down here, so a death just at the very end. We still have a Nimbus present in there, and we've also procced the 60% reaping wave, so it is absolutely crucial that they don't have any more deaths right now.
It was very important that they did have this battle rest ready for Lighty here, because of course the reaping wave coming in on top of all this, the Dervishes that they did kill by now. I'm actually wondering if they want to pull some of those reaping mobs on the boss. Oh, they're shadow melted, of course, they're Nano. So they got rid of the reaping wave. They are pulling Galvast now. Now Galvast is one of the most difficult bosses, if not overall in all the dungeons, because it's just so much AoE damage on the group. Now it is a fortified setting, but even there it is very difficult to deal with because of that Grievous.
A lot of damage coming here for Abrakeydabra. They opted to use their second Bloodlust here for the same 6 pull for the Dervishes that Method NA did without the Bloodlust. So much damage going off as the Nimbus gets that AoE pulse. Swagfist goes down. They have their battle res available right now, but Elstrat is just struggling to keep everybody alive. Dr. J 4 stacks ticking down violently. Divine Field barely ignore painting as much as he can to try and stay alive.
God.
Finally manages to heal everybody up as they stabilize with the remainder of the 60% reaping wave here. Swagfist has been res, but Ashine goes down, immediately releases in the second boss room and is starting to run back to help them out.
You can see just how dangerous this pull is. All those Dervishes doing so much AoE damage on the whole group, just jumping around, doing so much tank damage on top of that too, while this Nimbus is doing this AoE ability as well, just dropping everyone so low. And then you have the Grievous, of course, which means if you don't heal the people up immediately, they will get up to 5 stacks of this Grievous, just constant ticking damage on everybody. Now we see Elstrat being so low on mana and they're still not out of combat. They have to reset this boss. Elstrat has no way of healing this boss side with this little amount of mana.
Yeah, and I mean, there's just 4 stacks all over the place for Grievous right now. Elstrat has dug himself quite a nasty hole here. Method NA 10% left on Galvast, has executed this boss quite perfectly so far, making sure that they soak up those electric beams from the spires on the side. Don't want to let the boss soak those if he reaches 100 energy, which he can very quickly by soaking poking one of the beams will explode and one-shot the entire group. So no problem for them. I would say probably the hardest cusp and difficulty of this dungeon is now done for them with the 2 mass room pulls and Galvast. Now, of course, the probably hardest part of the dungeon here is this lightning bridge, Nagura.
Most definitely, but I've never gotten hit by any of those lightning bolts.
Oh no!
No, Nerf!
Oh no!
Oh, no.
I spoke too soon.
Clip please.
Unfortunately, Nerf has been, well, smacked in the face by some lightning orbs. Lighty, of course, monkey see, monkey do, decides to take one to the face as well, just to see what it feels like, but does come back in right away. Actually, was that Yoda or Lighty on the side there? Either way, one of them did get clipped at the very end, and they move forward now to get towards the channel and stop this wave of lightning coming in.
Now, this is actually very annoying for them because they had to commit a battle rest for Nerf here. Now, this can matter at the very end because now they're out of battle rest. This means if on the last boss fight, anyone dies, they do not have a rest to get them back up, and the last boss fight is a very long fight. So this could actually become a problem just by Nerf getting hit by one of those lightnings. Now we see them actually pulling this channeler here, which we've seen Method EU actually skip the last time, and I believe it's a good strategy to somehow try to skip this mob because it is just so inefficient to just kill this single mob with a lot of HP, not having anything to AoE, just a very big time loss.
It just takes so long. I mean, we've seen some of their teams at least attempt to kind of bring it in with the rest of these conscripts that to tank kites around in circles. It's just, you know, anything to save some time on that high health mob. Huge waste of time otherwise. We do see Nerf well moving around the room here to grab aggro and everything in order to clear the room so that the DPS members of the party are able to pick up the snake eyes on the sides of the room, and I'm not talking about dice here. They will rattle them into the eye sockets of the skull here, making sure to socket them at the same time so that they can spawn the 80% reaping wave. As we can see, they just shot up to 82. Everybody runs through the mouth as quickly as possible, and then once again we're going to see a round of Shadow Meld. Good old Night Elves.
Yeah, so one thing to be careful about when you're doing this Shadow Meld strat is of course the Volcanic, right? If you Shadow Meld earlier than the rest of your team and you get a Volcanic underneath you, the Volcanic will actually get you out. So your team needs to make sure that they are coordinated and do use the Shadow Meld at the same time to not have any problems with the skip, but they did manage, and now we can see the Spell Reflect strat coming out of Nerf here, reflecting both of the Hexer's abilities at the same time, throwing them back at them.
Yeah, you can see how accurately he tried to position between the 2 mobs, and I did like there how he was riding JB into combat there as a mount on top of that stag, so it does do well to reflect both of the Hexers. They kill them off quickly, opting for a slightly safer strategy instead of pulling all 4, as they do cast Flame Shock and Lava Burst on random members of the party. So they kill the first 2, get in on the second 2 Hexers, make sure they coordinate some proper interrupts, unless one of them is cast, fortunately, on Nerf, who can Spell Reflected by now. Likely the 25 seconds have passed. Once these Hexers are down, it's just about grinding through that last boss and then using the last phase of the boss with the super buff, essentially, that they get, and kind of pulling that hallway of trash onto them and cleaving it down. So Abrakeydabra certainly have their work cut out for them, plus they have 2 extra deaths on the board. Only now have they finished the gauntlet.
Yeah, so the last boss fight here does have 3 phases. It used to have 4 actually, but the fight was so long that they cut it down to only 3 phases. Now, what you have to do here in their normal phase is you have those 4 Hexers that spawn that are channeling to the middle. Now you have to kill all 4 of those Hexers to be able to heal the boss up. Now, the boss starts at 0%, you need to heal up to 70, and then the second phase will start. Once the boss is healed to 100%, the third phase will start.
So they are chewing through the Hexers right now. Still 2 left as they kind of bring this Heart Guardian around the room along with the Plague Doctor. Plague Doctor, not too dangerous. Have enough interrupts, of course, for the Snake Charm CC that he casts and also the Chain Lightning, but the Heart Guardian does a lot of damage to the tank and adds an increasing damage taken stack, 20% per stack. So you can't keep it alive for efficiency of cleave as you move around to the Hexers, but at some point you're going to have to help the tank out before the damage gets a bit too high. Nonetheless, the orb is triggered perfectly as JB pops his Tree of Life to get as much healing as he can. You see Lighty as well casting Vivify in the corner there, just trying to get any extra support healing.
Yeah, so you see him healing up until 70%. Now, Tree of Life plus Innervate is a very good combo because all of your regrowth are actually instant cast now, so you can get out so many regrowths during this duration of Innervate while all of your abilities cost no mana, so it went pretty fast there. We see the next Hexer spawn now. They do have their Bloodlust ready in comparison to Abrakeydabra, who do not have their Bloodlust. It's a very good point to pop it in phase 2, because phase 2 is kind of difficult to handle with all those toads coming around and the Hexers. Of course, that you have to deal with on top of the Hearth Guardian. So a very good time to pop their Bloodlust. And one more time to mention that they just don't have a battle rest, right? So if anything goes wrong here, they are in trouble.
Well, let's not think like that. I'm sure they'll be just fine as they soak up those frogs, making sure to dispel that disease. Lady will try to help with that, of course, as much as possible on that 8-second CD. Abrakeydabra has now aggroed the last boss. Unfortunately, I also saw that one of those Orb Guardians from the Gauntlet had unfortunately snuck over to them. Not too big of a deal. They're not too threatening, but they did have to grab it and were kept in combat the entire time as they are now starting their boss encounter as well. Sorry, they're finishing their first phase of the final boss encounter. Avatar now getting healed soon to 100% for Method NA, after which after a bit of RP, the Avatar will port down and buff all of the players with that super buff, so to speak, 50% haste, 50% increased healing, and 90% reduced damage taken.
Yeah, so of course with 90% reduced damage taken, it's very difficult for them to die at this point, so it really doesn't matter anymore that they don't have a battle rest. We see JB walking backwards, backtracking pretty much, pulling all this trash forward, and then Nerf will pick it up. Now of course for JB to pull this is not a big deal because again 90% reduced damage, so it is very efficient to just pull back the trash while having this buff. Not only are you pretty much invincible, but you just do so much more damage. Now one important thing to note is that as soon as this boss encounter is over, the buff will be immediately removed, so they need to make sure to not kill this last Hoodoo Hexer to not get rid of this buff too early.
Who do you kill then? Avatar is just about to be completed here. Last Hexer actually is at 3%. They have indeed dragged away from it. Oh, actually, sorry, the frame was incorrect. There was one more Hexer on the top there at 100%. They've moved the remaining 2 Heart Guardians that they've pulled from the hall on top of it, cleaving it down effectively on top of the Hexer. Everything nicely dying together here, and Method NA has now tied up the series at 1 apiece.
Is now tied here 1-1. Method NA finding their stride.
Phenomenal. I mean, they've really stepped up their game to the team that people know that they should be, in the caliber of the players that are on the team. So really excited to see how they perform here. And Abrakeydabra, of course, just that kind of EU all-star team composed of a lot of different high-end teams from the previous MDI. So this one is going to be an absolute slugfest here.
So we see Abrakeydabra here, of course, only playing this dungeon one time. Now they did have time to practice this dungeon though off stream, so maybe they have some new strategies coming in here as well, because of course they figured out that they're going to play against Method NA, and they probably figured out as well that Method NA finished the dungeon faster than them, so maybe there was some small things they saw other teams do that they adjusted their strategy to. And one difference already that we can see is Method NA used their Bloodlust for this very first pull, while Abrakeydabra didn't.
They didn't, and you know what? They're about to kill everything at around the same time, so not sure how much time they really gained from that. A lot more damage coming out of the 2 rogues, a lot more, relatively higher damage coming out of Abrakedabra's rogues for that pretty similar pull over the ones over with Method NA. Now, Nagur, we are back in the raging category, so mobs, trash mobs, of course, will do 100% increased damage, sub 30% health. We're back in Grievous as well, so the same thing we saw on Temple of Sethraliss. You start dipping below 90% HP, you will get an increasing physical dot up to 4 stacks.
Yeah, so they do a bit of a different pull here. Now, one thing to note as well, that Abrakeydabra was actually faster in his very first pull without Bloodlust than Method NA was with their Bloodlust. So maybe Abrakeydabra is using more different cooldowns, is using personal damage cooldowns, compared to Method NA maybe just only using a Bloodlust and no cooldowns. We will see later on what Abrakeydabra uses that Bloodlust for. But one thing that we also have to see here, that they're cutting backwards. Now, we've kept mentioning this kind of thing over and over, that kiting backwards just costs time, right? Even if you need to kite somewhere, you need to make sure that you're efficient with your movement. We have seen a lot of small things from Method EU.
Yeah, I mean, this kiting backwards here could be one of 2 reasons. One, of course, the raging, especially with all the attendant casters that cast the water bolt on the tank. Perhaps they decided to just kind of make sure that they didn't have any danger, but it looks more so like, to me, they were trying to separate the distance of where the reaping mobs spawned so that they immediately ran to this first boss area and cast their shadow meld as night elves. So looks like that worked out mostly to their favor. Only 1 tormented soul was accidentally pulled, as we now see a fairly sizable trash pull being done as the first boss RPs and spawns for them. Method NA has spawned Acusir and already aggroed it.
Yeah, just a pretty big pull coming out of Abrakeydabra here, pulling all this trash on top of the boss. This is what they're saved their Bloodlust for, so they're using it right now, clearing all this trash, these Templars and the casters on top of the Reaping Souls that they didn't manage to reset with their Shadow Melt. Now, those Reaping Souls, the reason probably why so many of those Reapings get skipped is because there's just so many caster mobs in this dungeon. So whenever you do get a Reaping, most of them are going to be casters. And the casters are so difficult to deal with because you can't position them properly where you want them to be, and they just consistently keep casting that bolt on random targets. It does quite a bit of damage if there's a lot of them going through.
This was a very juicy pull coming out of Abrakeydabra, but they're working their magic here and have managed to down it. Really well played by them. MOTHERLOAD trickling some trash from the edges as well on top of Acusir here as much as they can, but certainly not nearly as brazen of a pull as Abrakeydabra had there. Abrakeydabra now down to 69% on their Acusir pull. MOTHERLOAD to 54%. We'll be seeing the split soon, of course, with the 3 Aqualings that spawn in an equilateral triangle along the edges of the circular platform here. Always spawning in the same area, so you'll have 1 by the stairs, 2 by the edges of the platform. But, Nigura, these Aqualings do mimic all of the boss's main abilities, including that dangerous Surging Rush.
Yeah, the Surging Rush is the one ability you have to look for out for the most. They will pretty much target a random location and charge towards this location. If you get caught in their path, then you will get a lot of damage and you will be knocked back. So if you get knocked back, there's also the danger of falling off the platform, which is very dangerous, and of course you have to watch out for that. Then we also have other abilities like this knockback, as we can see right now, which just pushes you away from the mob and does a lot of damage while it happens. And of course all of them need to be tanked too. If they're not being tanked, then they keep casting a Soul Blast or something like that on the highest aggro target, which does a lot of damage, but can be spell reflected.
You know, it was very impressive the pull that Abrakeydabra did with all that trash on top of the first phase of Acusir here. But really, I mean, Method has done an almost equivalent pull, but just done it at a slower pace, splitting up that equivalent pull and dragging in 2 to 3 mobs at the same time. So I doubt that they're going to end up with too different of a trash percentage by the time it's all said and done here on the first boss. Nonetheless, Method and A started the boss first and will also finish this boss first as Acusir does go down. The Galecaller Apprentices were perhaps pulled just a bit too late. They do have to sit around and DPS them as Acusir has already died. Abrakeydabra will make up a bit of time here as Acusir has reformed from his phase 2 Aqualings and has now been killed for Abrakeydabra as well.
Yeah, so the only difference in trash is 2%, right? Abrakeydabra does to have 2% more trash. They were a little bit slower in the boss, but the 2% is probably going to make up for it. Now, one difference as well, though, is the Bloodlust, right? So Abrakeydabra will only have it up in 7 minutes, while Method and A used it at the very start and will have it up much sooner.
Interesting to see. I mean, a similar pull coming out of both teams here, but we have seen 2 versions of this pull, and each team is doing a different version. So on one hand, you have the double sap on the Iron Hull Apprentices on the outside. The tank runs downstairs, grabs everything, brings it all the way back upstairs. Divine Field has opted to actually run downstairs, grab the 2 Iron Hull Apprentices and the surrounding trash in the Scorn mini-boss, mini-boss room, and just cleave it all in the middle. So in terms of movement, slight efficiency in favor of Abrakeydabra here, but certainly more dangerous as you're in a much more enclosed space now.
Definitely, but we saw the Ring of Peace coming out of Swagfest here, making sure Divine Field is safe as he dropped really low. But as we can see, they're already down with this trash. They got to 40%, meaning they procced their Reaping. They will walk all the way through this mini-boss, and then they will Shadow Melt. Now, Method and A did this. Okay, they did reset. Okay, for a second I thought the mini-boss didn't reset. But Method and A did just skip the Shadow Melt skip already in their one of their last runs, and they didn't manage to do it. So let's see if Method and A does pretty much do the skip correctly, because the last time it went wrong, it cost him a lot of time.
I'm really loving the fluidity of movement here from Abrakeydabra. I mean, they just don't even breathe for a second. Shadow Meld came out, mobs reset. One of the Reaping mobs still followed them with the Grave Bolt, no problem. They picked up the patrol. They went right into one of the packs on the right. They grabbed a bunch of finishes. They're just going hard at it right now. Grievous starting to stack up a bit on the side of Abrakeydabra, so Elserat will have to pay a bit of attention to Swagfist. That actually dips quite low now. About to get his 4th stack of Grievous. Starts pumping some healing into him, making sure it doesn't get too out of hand. Jay eating a lot of damage as well, gets down to 5%, managed to get healed up. A lot of residual damage coming out as Divine Field subs 10% right now, getting all of the healing he can right now, but he's getting so many Grievous stacks built up, and Ashine as well, dipping so low. Still no proc for the cheat death for the Rogues right now. He's trying to stabilize desperately as they kite around in circles with the platform, but there's so many casters as well that need to be interrupted. It looks like finally we can stop holding our breath. Abrakeydabra has come out on top of this pull, and Method and A rearing up to do a similarly large, dangerous pull.
That was so close for Abrakeydabra here. They very well recovered, though, at this stage. We saw Divine Field just leaping away, trying to get away from these casters, trying to line of sight, making sure that none of these casts got through, as Atal'Dazar was struggling to heal up the group, right? If any of the damage dealers get any sort of damage, if they get hit by an ability that they shouldn't, then they do get this Grievous applied to them. Now, on a pull like that, where there's so much tank healing that is required, if the healer spends any sort of time trying to heal other members because of Grievous or they get hit by abilities, it takes away healing from Divine Field, meaning that all of them just dropped very low and Atal'Dazar just fell behind overall.
Method and A does not care about the pull Abrakeydabra has. They just took all the trash and brought it right on top of the second boss. Brother Ironhall and Galecaller Faye have been aggroed, but a lot of damage coming in on Nerf Clap, and there's a very limited amount of space on this platform where he can safely kite because of these raging mobs that have procced as well. So a lot to pay attention for the team here, not to mention that the runes that go down for Galecaller Faye that gives them the haste buff also buffs enemies as well. A lot of damage coming in on Yoda. The entire team getting chunked here. JB's got his work cut out for him as Yoda dips low, Shakib dips low as well. All of the DPS struggling to stay alive. They're accruing more and more Grievous stacks right now. The second boss has been pulled for Abrakeydabra in a very calm fashion at this point. No trash on top of it, but it looks like Method and A has also pulled off a quite sketchy pull and managed to stabilize.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra actually also pulled this trash on top of it. They were just like a little bit slower, and both of them do not have their bloodlust, but we've seen how dangerous this kind of pull is and how dangerous this boss is in general, especially Galecaller Faye, just having this constant blast that is getting casted by her. If it's not interrupted, the whole group will get an initial damage on application. It will also get a debuff on them, which increases their nature damage taken. So it's very important to do interrupt this debuff, but if you do, you see those tornadoes that are spawning. Now those tornadoes do a lot of damage if you get hit by them. And we see those wind zone on the ground. If the tornadoes go through the zone, they will actually speed up and go faster. Now it's very important to not get hit by them, because on top of just Grievous and all the other damage that happens on this pad, it can kill you very easily.
Certainly don't want to get blown away by those. Now, we see that Abrakeydabra is actually doing the more effective DPS strat, keeping both bosses alive and DPSing them down evenly, but of course more dangerous, as they will have to constantly deal with the mechanics you just mentioned, Nagura, including, I mean, look at their platform. It's just full of tornadoes right now. Method and A just getting Ironhall down to 7%. Not a single death on either team. Bloodlust is back up for Method and A. 2 more minutes for Abrakeydabra. The bosses die at around the same time. About 5 seconds difference between the two teams. This is going to be a close one.
This is so close. So both of the teams pretty much have the same trash percentage too. 57% on Abrakeydabra side, Method and A on 56%. So it's 1-1. This is the last game. This is the decider. So anything that goes wrong here will pretty much decide the whole match and who is out of the tournament and who moves on. Now we see Abrakeydabra doing a really big pull here. There's so many enforcers they pulled on top. This means Divine Fields cannot be hit by these mobs, especially not when they're raging. So you can see the Ring of Peace coming down here.
You can see the Divine Shield's shield wall fades away from him as those metallic shields. That graphic kind of goes away. There's 5 enforcers in this group. Now, if you're about 15-20 yards away from them as the tank, they will not do their deep smash, but if he gets too close here, he is dead. All of his CDs are consumed at the moment just to even get that pull together. Massive amounts of damage. Really ballsy pull here from Abrakeydabra. Looks like they will pull it off, though. They've already dealt with the third reaping wave. Same with Method and A at 61% on the trash, but they have some Risen Souls actually coming in right now. And of course, I mean, just here comes the troop, right, for both sides. Both of the reapings, they're just so far away, right, because a lot of the mobs were killed before the second boss. It's going to take them a bit of time to get in as both teams desperately try to run up the bridge. I'm curious to see if any Shadow Melds come out to avoid the pack here.
Most definitely. So they triggered the reaping wave for both sides, right? They skip the trash that they want to skip, and then they Shadow Meld. So they skip the reaping on top of just skipping the trash here. Very efficient use of Shadow Meld. Now, some of the mobs we see, a couple of Risen Souls are here, which is not going to take them a long time to kill, and then they can move on. Now, we see on Method and A side, they already pulled off the Shadow Meld. They did pull pull this tentacle pack the last time as well without pulling the patrol on top. We've seen other teams, and I believe it was Abrakeydabra too, that at some point pulled mobs together, while Method and A played it a little bit safer, and they're not increasing their risk here.
No, they're not, but Abrakeydabra has a bit of room to play with in terms of trash percentage here, as they did pull all 5 Enforcers, so they had about a 6% advantage over Method and A, so that's why they kind of stopped to kill just the 2 Risen Souls, so everybody could mount up and stealth past the Tentacle pack that Method and A just stopped to kill right here. I believe they're pulling both caster packs together, is that's what I'm seeing here.
They also popped their Bloodlust.
Yeah, this is a actually really scary pull. You have 4 Depth Bringers in here that cast that Rip the Rip Soul rather that I always talk about. Does a tremendous amount of damage to the tank and decreases max HP by 10%. So no doubt here that they pulled off with their Bloodlust, wanting to make sure that they kill these mobs as quickly as possible. Abrakeydabra taking it a bit slower, killed one of the 4 packs and has moved over to the other. Method and A still making sure to CC as well as moving away from those mental assaults, else you will get stunned.
Yeah, the mental assaults do have a bit of a interesting animation. It's a bit hard to see where the edges of this are, so you need to make sure that you walk as far away as possible, because if you get hit, you are getting stunned, which is obviously deadly, especially if it is on the tank or the healer, but we see none of them get hit by this ability. Now, Method and A using their Bloodlust very efficiently, getting that 78%. Now, after this, they are probably going to proc their Reaping here on Method and A's side, and Abrakeydabra also doing the same thing, just getting to those tentacles. Both of those teams are so close to one another.
It's actually so close right now, closer than a hair, which I wouldn't know anything about. Method and A has actually procced their Reaping and are getting ready to kind of either pull it on top of the boss or likely meld it off. We do know there's a lot of caster mobs in the background, probably something they don't want to have them hit in the back with once the Lord Stormsong is pulled here. Abrakeydabra opting to do the other side of tentacles, as well as the kind of Reaping comes in. Swagfist does go down, so we're going to have the first death here. Ashdon gets really low as well. Immediately the battle res comes up from Elstrat, wanting to make sure that they're full strength for this combination of Reaping along with the tentacles on the side. Method and A has already started on Lord Stormsong. That can be an extremely costly death. Later on, Swagfist goes down again. Elstrat goes down as well. Absolute disaster here for Abrakeydabra. It's going to be a full team wipe. There's nobody that can battle res, as the only battle res on the team has died. Divine Field about to go down as well. Dr. J, I don't know if he actually got the stealth off. No, he didn't. So full team wipe here. This is an absolute disaster with all those Reaping mobs with a huge aggro radius. So right now, this is Method and A's game to lose as they reach the halfway mark on Lord Stormsong.
This is so bad for Abrakeydabra. There's no way of them coming back from this wipe unless Method and A makes a huge mistake as well. Now, I'm not completely sure what they did there, because after they triggered the Reaping wave from this one tentacle pack, what we usually see from those teams is they go to the boss and they shadow melt to get rid of the Reaping wave. But we saw a Divine Field just charge into the other tentacle pack. Now, these tentacles are very scary because they randomly target people with a leash cast. It does a lot of damage. Now, usually when you only pull one tentacle pack, then all of them have their defensives ready, they have their stuns ready, and so on. But if you pull a second pack right after the first one, people all of a sudden don't have their defensives ready anymore. No cloaks, no anything like that. And we saw just people getting hit by these abilities and die. I'm not completely sure if they maybe missed a mob beforehand and had to kill the tentacle pack to get enough percentage to get to the next room, and they just kind of had a split decision to pull this pack.
But why would they not do it after shadow melding all of the enemies off? That was not a good play from them. And this dungeon is incredibly punishing in terms of where you start. There's no checkpoint here. So, well, except for the third boss, but by then you're probably done with the dungeon. It's not too difficult in the last room. So they've started all the way back at the beginning of the dungeon. They have to clean up some random Reaping mobs along the way that have a ridiculously large aggro radius. And they now have to deal with this mini boss here because they've not unlocked the shortcut to move over towards the second boss's platform. So, I mean, barring a full wipe from Method and A right now, maybe even 2 since they have unlocked the second checkpoint at Lord Stormsong, I mean, Method and A is likely going to take this. They go for a little dip underwater, avoiding those electric jellyfish, making sure they don't get that 8-second unimmutable stun. JB paddles through the water as fast as his little kitty paws can take him and moves over to the safety of the fourth boss's platform. Yeah,
so we've seen this last boss play out pretty much the same time from the same way of all the teams. So they do engage the boss. Now this boss is one important ability, which is a debuff that gets applied to the healer. Now this debuff stacks up to 9 stacks. It will increase the healer's damage done, and it will reduce is max HP, right? So they want to have the healer with this buff, and afterwards, when he's in the mission phase, he kind of just stands there and does nothing until you interrupt the boss. So during this time, they will pull the trash to get the rest of the percentage that they need, while the healer does more damage.
So unfortunately, they did not have the shortcut opened up for them, as we can see with Abrakeydabra. I'm pretty sure you have to kill the Ritualist close to the edge there, not the second boss. So they actually have to jump through the entirety of that trash. As you can see, Divine Field just struggling to get through. Ashine dies on the way. Divine Field's probably going to go down as well. Not sure if they'll get any form of savior off for the res. Elstrat probably desperately looking for somewhere to Shadow Mill, but there's just no room on this platform because of all the reaping that they skipped. Probably every square inch of the entirety of the second half of the dungeon is covered by some form of reaping mob. Method NA, of course, now dealing with their first phase and likely only phase transition here on Vol'Zith as they work to cleave down the remaining forgotten denizens. Then they will move over to the actual 3-pack of trash that you mentioned, Nagura.
Yeah, so those different phases are actually kind of difficult to deal with if you don't have a lot of interrupts. Now, of course, with triple melee, you're not going to be struggling here, but those denizens, they are actually casting an ability the whole time, which if it goes through, it will heal them to full HP, and it will do an AoE damage on all of them. Now, of course, it's not only is it very inefficient for them to heal to full HP, and they will have to deal the damage again, but it also does AoE damage, and it will kill the healer JB because he does have this debuff on him, which reduces their max HP.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first full screen of the tournament that we're seeing right now. So we got our first full screen BM. Unfortunately, Abrakeydabra just does not have the time to be able to catch up. The last eel packs are pulled over here for Method NA as they work to cleave them down with the power of JB's buff coming up from the boss. All that extra increased damage. Just got to make sure not to get any of those dots accidentally applied to him as Nerf Clap kind of kites away. There's a lot of shadow damage that comes up. Raging hits on the eels, no problem for them. 92% now. They grab the remaining 2 eel packs, which will put them close to 100%. They will likely CC one of the eels to make sure they don't actually proc their fifth wave of reaping, making sure, of course, to kill it just around the time that Vol'Zith dies.
Now, they do not have their Bloodlust ready. We've seen teams before use their Bloodlust just once they interrupt the boss, pop the Bloodlust just to make sure they're going to kill the boss before the second intermission phase. Because, of course, this whole intermission phase takes a long time. You need to kill the tank mob, you need to kill those 2 denizens, so it's very important that you do have enough damage. But I believe they have a reason to not have their Bloodlust ready here, and they probably calculated that they are going to have enough damage. Of course, with JB having this buff, and of course JB really likes doing that feral affinity rotation, so I do believe they're going to have enough damage to skip this intermission phase even without their Bloodlust here.
It should be no problem for them. We can already see the very last eel that they will need to kill. It's both paralyzed and sapped on the side of the room there. It's not going absolutely anywhere. Only thing they have to pay attention here to is making sure that those 5 manifestations do not reach Vol'Zith, else they will give him 10 energy per and can actually very easily trigger that last phase transition. No problem here for Method NA as they look to down Vol'Zith here. 20% left on the boss. The manifestations slowly making their way in. No problem for that Ring of Peace though.
So clean by them, 0 deaths up until this point. So the whole run, as we said earlier, just the very first time we saw them enshrined, they had this huge wipe, just kind of like Abrakeydabra here, right? But they're just pulling it perfectly. They just have to kill this last eel, and they're gonna be in the final.
Final eel going down here, and we are just moments away from an all-Method grand final in just a moment. Flawless performance here from Method NA as they down the last eel and take the series 2-1, returning to the upper. Method NA here, we're going to see the stealth going straight for that second boss, and we see a more aggressive approach, well, arguably aggressive, but it's certainly a different approach coming out of Method EU as they deal with the first essences. We know that Method EU actually liked to get that first reaping proc at 20% in the Triad Wing and then pull all of that reaping on top of the first boss. Method NA has already aggroed the first boss though.
Yeah, so they also used their Bloodlust here, Method NA sides, to just kill this Triad boss, while Method EU saved their Bloodlust maybe for this reaping pull, as you said, to pull it on top of the Triad. We see the Devil Sap coming out here, just stealthing past this. And one thing to mention, maybe Method EU, they did have a really good strategy coming in the very first time we saw them in Waycrest Manor. But this whole backtracking at the very end and then just being too fast, maybe they changed up their strategy and did something different now just to not have the same problem again.
Yeah, and I like what they did upstairs there. They actually double sapped on the far side of the top left hallway because we do know that one of the Runeweaver lieutenants actually spawns in the right portion of the hallway. So they double sapped and stealthed on through to make sure that they don't have to deal with that spawn and those mobs. Zelia dipping a bit low here, down to 7% right now with some of the pulsing damage, but manages to stabilize as they kite down the hall. A lot of damage coming in here. Let's not forget we are in Necrotic in Waycrest Manor. There's going to be a lot of strain on the tank as they desperately try to clean off some of their stacks in these tight spaces of the manor.
Yeah, so they did use their Bloodlust for this trash pull here on Method EU side. We see now just kiting those mobs around because they're just so dangerous on the mobs with these Shadow Cleaves. And of course, you also need to be aware that those witches, depending on which one they spawn, they are not actually susceptible. You can't stun them, you can't knock them back. So no matter what you do, the witch can refresh the Necrotic on the tank. So you need to be very careful when you do a pull like that, that your tank has some way of getting rid of the Necrotic here.
Method NA just down sub 10% on the final Sister Briar as they down the first boss. Only 3% on the trash, so they're going to be looking to work towards their first reaping momentarily here. So a bit of a flip-flop. We got Method EU on the left side working on trash, trying to proc their first reaping into the first boss, whereas Method NA on the right has actually killed the first boss, will work towards their first reaping, which likely they will pull with some trash.
Yeah, so of course we don't want to see them pulling that Reaping by itself to not lose. It's just so inefficient to kill Reaping by itself or do any single big HP mob by itself, as we've talked about a lot. So we definitely want to see both of those teams pulling the Reaping on top of something else, even though it is very dangerous because of those affixes. Just having the Necrotic, of course the Reapings do not apply Necrotic, but the trash does, of course, and just having the bursting on top of that too. It's just so dangerous when you have that many amount of Reaping mobs plus trash or plus a boss.
Nerf backing it on up like a U-Haul truck here as he tries to get rid of his 25 stacks of Necrotic. Does so successfully, but gets chunked as soon as he gets back in, propping right up to 6-7 stacks of there it is, of Necrotic as he kites in the opposite direction of the hallway. Now, I believe it was Method NA that ended up re-pulling the opening trash of the manor and then just kind of killing the Reaping pack there by itself. That, was it not them?
I believe so.
Yeah,
it was Method NA,
that we commented on. So hopefully they've kind of further developed that strategy to make more efficient cleave use out of their Reaping. We'll have to see here in a second as they're at the 11% mark. Yota getting chunked here quite a bit. There is a lot of cleave damage that goes on here with the two guards that are in there. They have that frontal shadow cleave, so have to have some careful positioning here. Method EU has indeed procced their Reaping pack as predicted. We've seen them do the first time and has already kind of aggroed the first boss.
Yeah, so this first boss is probably the most difficult boss in this whole dungeon. Now it is fortified, so of course it is a little bit less scary, but this triad here only has one boss active at a time. Whoever boss holds the iris will be active. All the other bosses do have 99% reduced damage, so you need to make sure that you do hit the boss whoever has the iris at this time. Now they all have an aura if they're active. The first boss, Selena, does have a 50% healing reduced aura. Now Briar has pretty much an aura that needs you to move all the time. If you stand still, then there will be a debuff that stacks up the death taking damage, as we can see right now happening. And the last boss does have a debuff as well that pretty much is just like a reflective kind of shield that doesn't do too much damage, so you can pretty much ignore that last aura.
Yeah, so Sister Briar dropping here for Method EU, and you know, I'm not really liking this. Method NA is doing the same thing here. They're proccing their Reaping with these essences. We're having Nerf, of course, leap around the area, making sure he avoids that. So they're going to proc their first Reaping just by themselves in this first area. These could and easily can be drawn into, you know, some trash in the courtyard, which is where they're going to make their next move. So a bit of inefficiency here, in my opinion, at least. Method EU just now dealing with the triad, finishing it off and pulling the rest of the trash in that room. So pretty equivalent trash percentage on both sides of the field here.
Yeah, one thing to note as well is that Method EU didn't actually pull those Acolyte packs from the side on top of the boss, which we've seen almost all of the other teams do so far. Now, of course, Method EU had the Reaping on top of it, so maybe they had to use so much resources to kill the Reaping on top of the boss that they just did not have enough defensives left and so on to kill, to pull the other mobs on the side as well, because of course they also have a lot of small toads on them, which are not very difficult to deal with, but they all apply Necrotic to the tank on top of just having the triads there, so that might be the dangerous part about it.
Method NA moves into the corner of the courtyard right now, making sure to drop that Ring of Peace on top of Nerf so he can reset his Necrotic stacks. Make sure that, hey, you know, it's really funny to see they did the exact same move last time, and I was just about to say good thing. Those mobs died right before the Ring of Peace ended, but now that they've done it twice in a row, is quite perfectly calculated on their part. apart to make sure that those very dangerous necrotic stacks are gone. So Gingy pulling really ahead here on his rogue as he moves all the way into Rawl's room right now. Kind of pops up in the middle, saps a few targets, and comes right back out as the rest of the team works to finish off these Thorn Shapers and, of course, the Thorn Guards as well. We do have a Soul Fetish go off on the X-marked Thorn Shaper right there, so once they die, it will actually buff a surrounding mob with a 5-stack of haste and damage, but as long as they're the last one to die, it doesn't really matter.
So one trick you can actually do in this dungeon is okay, so we always have the same door open on this tournament room. It's always top left, but on live servers it can be different doors that are open, just random. Now one thing you can do to open different kinds of doors is to actually engage with this boss fight and then vanish or use something like that, as we've seen Gingy just do, and it will actually open up some of the doors that would be closed otherwise, which enables some of the strategies that they're doing in this dungeon.
Yeah, very clever play from them there to be able to kind of just open up the entire play field for themselves. Pretty big pull trash pull, excuse me, here from Method EU on the left side, looking to likely prop their 40% round of Reaping, which, if I'm not mistaken, they pulled on top of Matron Brindle in the back there. I mean, this was yesterday, and I can't remember what I had for breakfast, so we'll have to see exactly how that works out for them. Method and A also just working to finish off the rest of the trash. Both teams kind of edging on that 40% Reaping wave in just a moment, but Lady getting quite low here as well, 10%, and he's just desperately getting healed up by JB with all of those bursting stacks on the group.
Yeah, it's just so important to have a proper bursting management here. Especially in Waycrest Manor, there's so many small mobs that apply bursting to your group, and if you kill something at the very last second while the bursting is about to disappear, it will refresh the duration of your bursting and give you an additional stack. So it's very important to deal with that properly. And we do see Method EU proc the Reaping here. They decide to pull it on top of this mini boss here.
So indeed, they do pull it on top of Matron Brindle. Now, unfortunately, now did not have the time before she started her Thorned Assault to get Brindle into one of the fires that spawned near her, just to get that extra bonus damage. So a bit of time lost there. Nothing too significant, however, as he works backwards there just to get her into that last fire for the remaining about 25% of her HP. Method and A not falling too far behind here, working on Brindle as well. Now, they have not yet procced their Reaping, and likely with her death, they will do so. So it looks like they'll likely be pulling, I think we just saw them do it earlier and you were commenting, hopefully the boss doesn't have an issue with a despawn for them, but they were pulling the Reaping on top of this Soulbound Goliath and cleaving it there, whereas Method EU decided to do it with the Matron.
Yes, I do believe Method EU is a little bit ahead at this point because they both engaged the boss pretty much at the same time. Now, Method NA has 41% trash percentage, while Method EU actually has 47%. So they are ahead in trash. They both do not have a Bloodlust ready for this boss fight, but this boss fight shouldn't be a big problem for them on a fortified setting. Now, Goliath does have an aura that stacks up the longer he's not being dragged into fire. That increases the damage done on the tank, of course, and also on the group once you do drag him into the fire.
Yeah, so we, if I'm not, well, I was actually about to say, if I'm not mistaken, Method EU barely reset the boss in the previous time we saw them on Waycrest Manor, but now deciding to play safe here as they dip him in the first round of fire. You can see that they're standing a bit further away from the boss, and Azalea is also running to the side of the platform as he does have aggro on those red ghosts that spawn. They spawn for about 15 seconds, and he rips healing aggro off them. You can't taunt them or anything, so he has to run them away for the group while everybody else is stacked on top of the boss to make sure that they bait the thorns and can be cleaved down effectively.
Yeah, it's very dangerous, those red mobs. They usually do have aggro on the healer because of healing aggro, but if for whatever reason your healer was not healing anything or was getting targeted by the thorns, then it might be the tank who got healing aggro passively by his defensives, and then if a tank is not prepared for those red ghosts hitting him, then he might just die. So you need to be careful here that the healer actually gets the aggro and drags him away.
Method NA pulling just a bit ahead in terms of single target damage, maintaining about a 5 to 6% cushion over Method EU with the Soulbound Goliath, but conversely there is a 6% trash advantage for Method EU, and we know that that's in the range of the amount of trash that teams kind of ignore until Gorak Tool is done, so we'll have to see which of the two strategies they opt to use with cleaning up trash at the end of the dungeon. Method NA now moves into probably what is the most dangerous part of this dungeon in terms of mob density versus a Necrotic plus bursting, so a lot of healing output is going to be needed here, and a lot of tank damage is going to be incoming.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of deaths come in here from previous teams in these dungeons because of those big pulls here. We see the Vortex coming down, we see the AoE stun coming down just to control these mobs here that do just randomly cast this spit on random people that do a lot of damage. And we see Gingy, unfortunately, having so much aggro, getting almost 20, I think around 20 necrotic stacks on him, which of course reduces the healing, but he's a rogue, right? So he does have a lot of defensives to deal with that, and he probably did cloak away those bursting stacks to not be in trouble while having the necrotic debuff on him.
Yeah, so no problem for them as they kind of safely kite around, grabbing this last 3 pack in the corner, which looks like they will spawn their 60% reaping wave for Method to use safely here in the courtyard, where there is some nice amount of space for now the tank to be able to kite around as needed should the stacks get out of hand and Xaylia miss any dispels, of course, from the reaping mobs. Method and A still at 46% on the trash, getting some of the saps in Rawl's room as we see a pretty sizable pull coming in from Method and A. So cheeky play there where they actually despawned Rawl temporarily while the rogue ran in, allowing the ability for Nerf to run in, pull the entirety of the trash in the room because we know the danger of Rawl being stationary with Necrotic. So they're clearing out all of the boss's room whilst despawning the boss within that small time window and just doing as much damage as they can outside with that Bloodlust popped.
Yeah, we see Method Method EU also popping their Bloodlust. They did trigger their Reaping Wave outside with this huge pull that they did, and they walked back, pulling Rawl with this Reaping Wave. Now, this is dangerous at the start. Of course, the Reaping mobs, not only are there a couple of casters, as we can see, just keep casting those Grave Bolts, and it's very hard for them to also stack them up because, of course, there's no Blood Decay or anything like that for a Mass Grip. The only thing they do really have to displace them is that Typhoon and a Ring of Peace, but we can just see them in the back just constantly casting on the group, and we also have bursting stacks from some previous mobs that they pulled as well on the whole team. We start to see Sally drop really low here.
So no problem for them in the end. Now did get up to about 31 stacks of Necrotic, a lot of healing reduction, 62% healing reduction from that. Xaylia in a more one of the most defensive roles that I've seen him in so far, actually was just pumping as much healing as he could into now. Unfortunately, he couldn't reset the Necrotic stacks as early as he'd wanted, but still, they managed to do the pull here. Massive pull on top of Rawl with Bloodlust for them. Method and A following suit though, grabbing that Reaping Wave and bringing it right into Rawl's room. We're going to have to keep a close eye here on Nerf's Necrotic stacks and on his Reaping stacks. He's at 10 and 15 apiece. Finally gets the Dispel from JB as he starts to still accrue more Necrotic stacks, and as long as those 2 Gorgers are alive, he will keep getting the stacks and not having the natural resets that Rawl allows during this Tenderize because he can't leave proximity of the boss.
Okay, so we saw the Gorgers actually jump to targets, and they will leave behind a bleed debuff that actually does quite a bit of damage. And we just saw them jump, applying 2 of those stacks to Nerf on top of this already existing Necrotic. So they have to be very careful here to not have Nerf die on top of all of this other damage that happens. And now we see Method E almost downing Rawl here. So they are pretty far ahead when it comes to boss HP. They are 40% ahead, while also having 2% more trash.
Yeah, so Method E certainly in a pretty prime position, having or proving to have at least a better pull pattern so far over their counterpart Method NA. Now, Warriors especially, you know, we keep saying all this necrotic damage, but really Rawl does not do a lot of damage, and the quality of the trash that they pulled on top of him does not do a lot of tank damage. Warriors are well known to be just rocks in terms of tanking with mitigation and smoothing, so getting up to that amount of stacks isn't too dangerous when their health's not even really moving in the first place. But, you know, I mean, there's a limit, of course. If they get unhealables, take a chunk, that's going to be problematic for them. But both tanks managed to get to the 30s stacks of Necrotic on Rawl and just live quite easily through it. Rawl now down to 10% for Method NA, while Method EU is cleaning up the kitchen here.
Yeah, a lot of times what we see out of Method EU is those tricks pulls, as we can see them drop really low on this pull here. But they do have Devil Rogues available to them. They can put their tricks on the warrior, and then they can just run off, pull a bunch of trash, and they will just aggro on now on the Proud Warrior, and it will come back. So very efficient use of tricks here, as we're gonna see something very interesting. Actually, no, I think they changed up their strategy, actually, because the last time around, we've seen them do some bigger pulls here in the basement, but now they're choosing to shove past it.
Yeah, they pulled Alma last time. We kept commenting on it. Of course, the warrior can reflect the Decaying Touch. They certainly do not have enough trash percentage right now to be able to just complete the dungeon with the last horrors on top of Gorak Tool, so they might still be sticking to their guns of killing Gorak Tool and warping up with Bloodlust for the final pack. We'll have to see what they do here. Certainly didn't pull any extra trash from the basement down to the cellar here, but did decide to pull the entirety of the room prior to engaging managing the, I was going to say the Stormsong, that's the wrong dungeon, but the Waycrest couple here. Method and A still grinding through in Rawl's room as they pulled the rest of the hallway of the surrounding maggots up to 72% now. So they do have a bit more percent to kind of play with and skip down to if needed.
Yeah, so Method is still working on the spec now. Now it's dropping really low. These mobs are very dangerous in combination to one another. We saw the Ring of Peace coming in the Typhoons to be able to deal with all of the Necrotic plus bursting stacks plus all the caster mobs, of course, that at some point you just can run out of interrupts, even if you have 3 melees.
Yeah, so they do down the trash, and of course this next boss here, once again, kudos to Protware, has that spell reflect that can be used on Lord Stormsong himself. We've seen this boss a few times already in the series, just to refresh everyone's memory. Lord Waycrest, the one on the right, not the fake Lord Waycrest on the left, which is actually Lady Waycrest, will get killed several times down to 20% HP, and at that point, Lady Waycrest will siphon 30% of her health over to him. When she reaches 10% after 3 rounds of this, she will join the fight as well for the second phase.
Yeah, so we saw them actually proc the Reaping and pull it on top of the boss. So just in general, pretty efficient dealing with the Reaping here by Method AU. Now this boss in the first phase, what Lady Waycrest does while she's not actually in the fight, she just throws these bolts at random targets, as we can see the animation coming in here. Now on 45, it is manageable, it doesn't do that much damage, but you can get a little bit unlucky and just be shot by her multiple times in a row, while also having this debuff, as we see this on Gingy right now, which is a disease, and a circle around the player does ticking damage, and once it explodes, you need to make sure that you're not close to any other player, else it will jump over to them.
Method and A, it looks like they largely actually shadow melded their 80% Reaping wave. A couple of them leaked downstairs. They did grab, no, actually a lot of them are running towards them, so I'm not sure if they tried to or not. I did see a shadow meld go off. Nonetheless, they pulled the captain and the Thunder Shaper from upstairs in the basement area down towards the rest of the group right in front of the Waycrest family. They're opting for a strategy where they will have enough percent on top of the horrors with Gorak Tool at the end. So it does look like they're a bit behind, but Method EU will have to make up the remaining trash percentage after Gorak Tool dies. They have absolutely no choice behind that.
Yeah, so there's 2 different stats coming in from those 2 teams. Now, Method and I will not have to backtrack. We talked about backtracking, right? It's not very efficient. Now, Method EU, we don't really ever see them do anything that is very inefficient, except in this dungeon where we see them do the backtracking, where we see them go back after the last boss and kill this last trash pack that they need. Maybe they just decided this is the best strategy for this dungeon because they get the proper Reaping waves at the exact time as they want, and maybe they just decided that the walk back to talk to them and to spawn at the entrance again and kill this pack is just worth it, and it's just the best time we can do.
So they just deal with the mob straight on here as Now stays in as long as he can, making sure that they drop that Ursul's Vortex while Xaylia baits that jump from the Gloom Horrors on the outside. Once Now's had enough at 30 stacks, he leapt out, and Mir's dropped his Ring of Peace as support, so Now can let go of those Necrotic stacks. No problem for them. He gets down to 2% though, so we have a bit of a death there on Now with the mishealing from the bursting. Likely won't cost them too much though, because they do have the checkpoint from the 4th boss here. As he just reses immediately. Xaylia manages to get a drink in, and they rush downstairs to Gorak Tool. They've already dealt with the horrors. 9% trash left on the board for them. Have to kill Gorak Tool first, and then they will head upstairs to that same pack of trash we saw them have some struggles with actually last time. So a bit of benefit here for Method NA as they run over and finally pull the Waycrest family. So it's actually going to be a bit closer than you think here.
Okay, so as you said, so Method NA doesn't actually need to backtrack, but they're 1 whole boss behind. I don't think this is going to make up for the backtracking. Now, Method EU only needs to kill this boss, which actually dies really quickly on 45, and then they have to, so the boss that Method NA is working on does take a lot longer than the last boss, Gorak Tool. So I do think Method NA is their game to win here. As long as they don't have a full wipe again like the last time, once they backtracked, did not have their bloodlust ready, and actually wiped them this trash bowl to get their last percentage, then it should be their game to win here.
But I'm actually having a bit of concern that they're going to have deja vu with that very same issue. There's
Maybe.
still 2 minutes left on Bloodlust, and they're absolutely destroying through Gorak Tool's health. I mean, they're cutting through it like warm butter right now, dealing well with the Slavers, making sure they're interrupting the death lens so that none of the players get permanently stunned. See that nice gouge come up on that particular Slaver, and burning the corpses before Gorak Tool reaches that 100 energy. So they're handling everything quite well, obviously. Lady Waycrest is finally down, so we're on the second 5-second phase for Method NA right now, after which they will pull presumably the first 5, maybe even actually 6 horrors while they CC the last one, and then start on Goraktul as well. 15% for Method EU as they look to down it and get upstairs as quickly as possible for the trash.
Yeah, so you see the slavers jump around here. Sally actually doing a really good job at putting that AoE out, because the slavers actually do a splash damage once they hit their target. So Sally running away, making sure not everyone else is getting hit by the splash damage. So very good job at them. Now the boss goes down. They're very, very fast at jumping up the sledge. Now they need to talk to this NPC that just spawned to get back.
And they have 1 minute left on Bloodlust, so once again, will not have the Bloodlust available, so we'll see if they can capitalize on the error they had here. They still need 9% trash, and there's a lot of damage that comes from the trash in this room. Now doing well, of course, to line of sight the mobs behind that pillar, as there are some ranged mobs in here that have quite an annoying time getting close to the tanks. Have to be careful for any of the traps that are currently on the ground. Method NA still grinding through those horrors as they work their way to Goraktul in a second. Method EU should have this in the bag unless they have any issue with deaths like they did the first time. Now making sure to play it safe here and not get too many necrotic stacks. Shield wall fading off of him in just a moment. 17 stacks gone, and they should be able to clutch this in just a second.
Yeah, so they still have Bloodlust cooldown, so they were even faster than the last time they did Waycrest Manor. Just incredible strategy coming out of Method EU here. While both of those teams played super clean, only 1 and 0 deaths, but Method EU just having the better strategy.
As the gates open for both teams, now charges right into that first maggot and grabs the matron as well, grouping the entirety of the 6-pack together, and of course ignoring those ticks on the side. Method NA in a similar pull, so exactly equivalent pulls coming out of both Method teams here.
Yeah, so we've seen Method NA twice in this dungeon. Now, we should keep our eyes on Method EU for now, because they might just have one strategy that we have never seen before, something completely different, because they had the fastest time in Underrot, or one of the fastest time, definitely faster, 40 seconds than Method NA, and Method NA have been crushing it in this dungeon. They've won both of those 2 games early in the tournament.
Right, you are, Nagor. Of course, we are back into the Sanguini and Volcanic affixes here. Volcanic wanting to be avoiding those fire plumes that we just saw one explode on Method EU at the bottom of the screen there. Sanguine, meaning they drop the pools of goop on the ground when they die, which heal friendly enemy mobs, and of course do damage to friendly players. Want to make sure you move out of those, and the tank is constantly kiting and backpedaling out of that. Method NA now having a bit of struggle here with Lighty dropping low, but has seemed to stabilize health as those hots carry him back up to safety. Method EU is also dealing with a similar mask pull. Both teams likely looking to proc their first reaping and bring it on top of the first boss, Liaxa.
Yeah, some scary pulls coming in from both of those teams. Now this tyrannical, so the trash is not buffed, but pulling those double matrons onto these big packs, especially this pack with the blood soul in the middle that usually gets ignored, like that gets skipped by on live servers, because it's just such a dangerous pack to deal with. So many interrupts, so many priests, so many casters and matrons coming in that you usually just skip this, but very good control from both of those teams to be able to handle these packs. And we see on Method NA stats, they did proc the reaping and pull it on top of the boss with the Bloodlust.
Yeah, just a bit faster too. That 21% on the trash, 22 now for Method EU as they run over to Liaxa as well. Getting that first spell reflect on the Blood Bolt, seeing a big chunk go down for Liaxa from Method EU. Now is of course with his spell reflect. Method NA doing the same thing, just slightly ahead, but Nerf, as I spoke too soon, actually goes down. They get the battle res up. They have to interrupt that Blood Bolt, because as soon as the tank dies, the next Blood Bolt will hit the next highest aggro target. Extremely good recovery here. That is usually a disaster on live server for most teams when that happens. So they managed to recover. They are down the battle res now and plus 5 seconds on the clock, but managed to stabilize here. They've killed off the Blood Mirror and are going about Liaxa as they were before, back to 30%. Method EU still dealing with Liaxa at 50%.
Yeah, so one battle res out here. Thankfully, no one died while the tank was dead. Usually, when a tank dies on a boss fight, then the boss will immediately aggro some melee around him and kill him too. But because this boss pretty much only does damage with the blood bolts, they managed to interrupt them all and keep everyone else alive. Now, what I do believe happened with Nerf here was that he wanted to spell reflect one of the casts, but he actually got targeted by one of the reaping souls and reflected that spell instead. But he did get one shot by something, so I assume it was a blood bolt.
Now also just eats one of the bolts to the face and dips down to about 5% HP. A lot of damage that come off of those blood bolts. Equivalent amounts of damage from the blood effigies as well, the mirrors that it casts from the boss. So want to make sure you interrupt all of those. Spell reflect coming up on that last last one to help finish the boss off as Method EU finishes up. Method and A wasting absolutely no time on the right side of the screen here as they rush into the second boss's room, into Krag'wa's room.
Yeah, so we see this huge pull again from them going to the left side, making sure they pull the Blood Swarmers carefully, and once all the Blood Swarmers from behind the boss and the left side are gone, they will do this crazy pull on the right side where they will gather up all the mobs, where we have seen JB dying twice now. Now, they did manage to recover the last time, but this time around they do not have a battle rest for him.
Right, you are. And the bigger deal, of course, is they haven't even done the difficult pull yet here with the two Blood Swarmers, as we're seeing right now, and the Guardians as well, getting some CC up on those. They missed the first Sonic Screech interrupt, which is a lot of damage on the group, and interrupt spellcasting, so they cannot have things like that leak through. Method EU doing an equivalently large pull. One of the Sonic Screeches goes out for them as well, but everybody is already quite healthy.
Yeah, so Method EU, I want to mention again that in the time trials, they did play Underrot. They did have the fastest time out of the whole western region, but they had a Frag play a DK. So not seeing the swap out of Method EU here either means they have even a better strat to play something like that, but it's weird to think about it because they haven't shown their Underrot strategy yet with their DK, right? So it's still a secret what exactly they did in the time trial. So not bringing out the DK and just maybe changing their strat around a different comp seems interesting.
It is important to note that they're also moving a fair bit faster. I mean, they proc their 40% Reaping Wave before Method and A, and Method and A reached this room first. Granted, Method and A has done some kind of more dangerous pulls so far, so they've gotten over some kind of humps a bit faster than Method EU in that sense, with some of the Blood Swarmers in the back of the room in Krag'wa's room. So Method and A now dealing with another large pull here. Method EU will still have to follow suit with some of the Blood Swarmers. Big pull here out of Method and A, and this is where we saw JB struggle a bit in the previous dungeons that they did.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of mobs that are very dangerous, especially when you do those large pulls and you pull them on top of each other. That's why we usually on live service, when people do those dungeons on really high levels, they try to not pull too many mobs at the same time, because there's just so much control needed for the lashers. You need to interrupt their cast, else somebody gets stunned, and to remove the stun you either need to dispel it, which it is a disease, or you need to heal it away because it is a heal absorb. Now, if for example the Windwalker gets stunned, then they do not have a disease dispel, and then the Windwalker is not able to interrupt his assigned cast. So it can really fast go out of control if any of those casts goes through.
Good asphyxiate there by Shakib to make sure that he stuns that maggot before it does its frontal and it potentially clips somebody in the group and kills them. 60% Reaping Wave has procced as they drag it right on top of Krag'wa, the second boss of the dungeon. Now, not a mechanically complex boss, but we are in a tyrannical setting here, so there will be an indigestion frontal that for warrior tank is very simple to deal with, very well exemplified there by Method and A, as Nerf just leaps out of the frontal goes off, charges back in, no problem. They will also have to deal with the charges. It snapshots it in the direction of a player, move out of the way, and then easily just stomp the maggots before they spawn afterwards. But the biggest danger to Nagura, of course, is the Tantrum at 100 energy.
Yeah, so at 100 energy, the boss will run around the room, cast his Tantrum, pretty much doing a lot of AoE damage on the whole group and spawning those ticks that you need to soak on the ground, as we can see right here. If you do not soak those ticks, if you don't walk inside them, then after a couple of seconds they will actually spawn a tick out of it, and of course the tank or whoever has the most aggro will have to tank them, and they will do a stacking bleed on the tank or the healer, whoever is aggro, and it does a lot of damage.
Indeed, a lot of damage coming out for JB here, but I've seen him practice this boss a lot, so he knows exactly what he needs to handle for that Tantrum pulsing around as Krag'wa goes around the room. Now, a bit of different tanky positions for the two teams. Method EU opting to tank it on the side near the ribcage, making the charges easier to bait into the wall and not having the maggots that need to be stomped be nearly as spread out. Method EU opting to just do it right in the middle of the room, makes it easier for Tantrum as he just starts already in the middle of the room, and makes the spread of maggots easier to deal with for that phase. But of course the charges do go off to the side, so pros and cons on either strategy. What is obvious though right now is that Method and A is ahead by about 15%, but keep in mind they do have that death on the board from earlier and still don't have that battle res available for another minute and a half or so.
Yeah, and we see for Method EU as they actually have two Blood Swarmers that CC'd on the end of the room, while Method and A only has one Blood Swarmer left to deal with. So we'll have to see if Method EU actually decides to pull a Skeleton Pack, which is already pretty difficult difficult to deal with on top of those double Blood Swarmers, or if they decide to pull them one by one.
Or if they just decide to shadow meld them off and just not deal with them in the first place. Wouldn't be shocked to see that. Those mobs are a huge pain in the butt. They're quite dangerous too, as they fixate on different players, and you need a lot of interrupts for them. So maybe they're just planning to ignore them as they deal with Krag'wa and try to finish it off here. 13% left for Method and A on Krag'wa, as I believe they just had their last round of Tantrum. So looking to finish that up before JB kind of runs out of gas and CDs for the quite spiky damage of the Tantrums. 5% left now, and we'll see exactly what they decide to do with those Blood Swarmers. But right on their heels, Method EU, 10% behind them, but do have that 5-second advantage because of the death on Method NA.
Yeah, so it's very important to have a lot of single target damage on this boss, because if you get one less or one more Tantrum actually matters quite a bit, because well, now they can finish the boss off and can ignore the maggots, but if the boss is still higher HP, the people need to run around and of course can't do any damage to the boss while they are soaking. That means if you get an extra Tantrum and you have to soak, you lose just so much more time.
Decently sized pull here, as we see one Bloodstorm actually get grabbed from the sky, because there are some flying around on the side of the Underrot here. The Sonic Screech unfortunately does go off, but I think that was a planned explosion there, because they do have a Defiler in their group, which has 2 important casts, the Shadow Bolt, AoE, Volley, and of course the Withering Curse that needs to be kicked. Otherwise, the players will do 2% less damage per stack for I think like 10 or 15 seconds, so it's a pretty long debuff. But they do well to finish off the Guardian pack along with the Defiler there, and they move over just past the 3rd boss, likely wanting to proc their 80% reaping, which they will bring on top of the 3rd boss and cleave it down. Yeah,
very efficient movement here by Method and A. On the other side, on Method EU, we've seen them do a pretty big pull where they pulled both of the skeleton packs on top of this worm. Once they finished off the worm, they actually kept moving onwards and just chain pulled those 2 Defilers on top of this huge skeleton pack here.
Yeah, so they're looking to do the same thing, but they're going to proc their 80% reaping through different means. One of the volleys, I believe, goes off there, so it hits the group for about 50% of their HP. Really damaging ability, making sure to move out of those Spirit Drain totems. Those essentially will one-shot a player. They do a huge amount of damage, and they proc their reaping and start on Spore Caller Xancha, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. Method and A still working to finish off the rest of their trash, and they will backtrack and pull it on top of Xancha as well. So Method EU looking to take a little bit of a lead here. Doesn't matter that the trash ahead of this boss was already cleared by Method and A, because they have 2 rogues. They'll just double stealth through it.
Exactly. So Method EU, again, so we've talked about backtracking a lot. Now, Method and A walked past the boss, had to pull mobs in front of the boss to trigger the reaping and then go backwards. Now, Method EU actually procced their reaping before the boss, so they didn't have to walk back or anything. They just kept walking forward, They kept chaining mobs on top of it, and even though they were behind up until to this point, they're actually ahead now.
And Frag just gets clipped there by the upheaval as he runs over and shrooms those mushrooms down on the side, making sure that there's not too much damage from the boss. A bit of disaster here for Method NA, as Shakib actually does go down. They need to use their 1 available battle res to get him back up. Yoda has also procced Cheat Death, so won't have that available for probably the remainder of the dungeon at this point. There's not too much left for them to go, so 2 deaths on the board for them. Method EU looking still really clean as they hit the halfway mark on Spore Caller Xancha.
Now, Method NA does have 91% trash, as they kept pulling mobs on top of this, which was very efficient. Now, Method EU still needs 18%, which does mean that the mobs that Method and A actually kill later, Method EU might have to pull anyway. So this is still like a very, very close matchup. They're both on the same boss, both similar percentages, and both of them do have their Bloodlust ready. Now, unfortunately for Method and A, they did have to use 2 of their battle rests, so they have 2 deaths and they have no battle rest available to them.
Yeah, that could prove to be quite deadly later on. Team doing well here on Method EU to dodge those poisonous balls that fly across the arena every time Xancha reaches 100 energy. Every time the mushrooms on the side grow, not related to energy, of course. Xancha down to 25% HP there. Method NA down to just past 50% now. So Method EU actually kind of widening the gap just a bit. It was only about a 20% difference before. Probably another round of cooldowns came up for them. Not sure what they're going to want to be saving, though, and how big the trash pull that they're about to do is going to be, because Method NA, as you mentioned, Negro, certainly doesn't need as much trash.
Yeah, so we see on Method EU sides, of course, as well, that they don't really have to deal with a lot of those mushrooms because they just have this double cloak to go through them, get rid of them. And we just saw, so actually this is very efficient, even though Sethraliss does not have an immunity or anything to get rid of this disease from the mushroom, but it obviously costs the rogues a lot of damage if they have to walk back, soak the mushrooms and cloak them off. Now we see Sethraliss taking the mushrooms instead and then getting dispelled by mirrors by the Windwalker monk, because they can do disease dispel.
Yeah, so we'll see exactly what Method EU is up their sleeve here. They do deal with the Guardian pack along with that one Death Speaker in the middle, making sure to interrupt Ray's dead for the Death Speaker. Don't want that extra Guardian, and as many as they can of the Bone Shield cast, because it just adds an extra layer of damage they need to do. A bit of sketchiness here on Method NA side as we see some of the poison go off on the group. JB does manage to heal through it. It was only one stack if I'm not mistaken, so
yeah,
nothing too deadly, but close call for them. Xancha now about to fall for Method NA. They're going to hustle and head off as quickly as they can over to the last boss's room. Only 9% trash needed for them as Method kind of works as quickly as they can to get their trash percentage up. 95 on the board for them. They're also heading to the last mobs that they need right before the gate of the last boss.
They're just so fast right now. It's 14 minutes for them currently in the dungeon. They're ready to trigger the reaping. They're ready to get to the last boss. So insane time here. So I guess their idea was just, you know what, guys, we don't need this Unholy Decay. This Unholy Decay might look really good on the damage meters, but it's not giving us the single target damage that we need on those tyrannical dungeons. And this AoE that we need, we can have that with Rogue as well. So I feel like they just decided to take the Rogue instead, play their strategy, and say, you know what, we're going to be faster this way.
A couple of smacks of tentacle damage go out on Frag and Mirrors, but only chunk them to about 50% HP. After that, they avoid them quite easily. Shakib does go down again. Unfortunately, they do not have a battle res available, Nagura. So as you were alluding to, this is becoming a big problem for them. Now the faceless corruptors that they have to deal with are about to die, but this is just seconds and seconds left. Nerf gets hit quite hard as well, manages to get healed up in a moment.
So they will also trigger the reaping if they kill off this mob. So this is a very huge problem. They cannot get out of combat here without triggering the reaping. So they will have to figure out something, because either JB needs to go off Shadow Melt, get out of combat and rest him up, and be sure that he doesn't get in combat with anything else. There we go. Okay, so JB managed to actually Shadow Melt in the corner and managed to rest him back up. But this is a disaster. Even if they manage to rest him back up, it just takes them so much time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of time lost here for Method NA as Shakib is finally rezzed and rejoins the fight, proccing their reaping. Gonna have to wait a bit as they port downstairs. They're gonna have to frantically pull this boss because Method EU has already dealt with their last reaping wave and is on the final boss here, Unbound Abomination. Titan Keeper Hezrel doing the best he can to make sure that he kills the blood spawns every time the boss reaches 100 energy. The player's damage. The boss damage is translated into energy. Reach 100 energy, kill 2 adds, do that 3 times over, and the boss falls over. Now, the kiting pattern for Method EU is a bit weird here. You usually kind of see it, you know, move in a circle around the area, but I guess they're just kind of spam AoEing as the spores get close to them, so they don't really care and only need to displace themselves should the area that they're safely under the boss gets covered. So they're really minimizing their movement, but a bit weird, that's for sure. But it's working out for them, that's what matters. 1/3 of the boss health down for the Unbound Abomination as Method NA has finally aggroed the last boss.
Yeah, one thing to note here is this circle, as we can see right now on one of the rogues, not only does it remove the magic debuffs that stack up on all the people, but it also removes the gray zones on the floor. So maybe they're using a strategy like that, just, you know what, we're going to clear these zones so we don't have to move that much. We're going to lose less damage because, of course, every time you have to dodge the frontal, which leaves those gray pools behind. If you move the boss very far, then the melees have to follow up. They might lose a melee swing or 2, and it is a damage loss, right? So anything matters here.
So we, of course, see the boss kind of being kited slowly around the room here. Getting, you know, there is some benefit to killing these mobs, especially, at least for the Prot Warrior, for instance. You're getting Victory Rush procs from them, and maybe some combo point building as well for the Rogue. So just trying to beef as much single target damage and self-sustain as they can. So Zayla can get some damage. JB is down for Method NA.
Oh, no.
Shakib is not able to res him as they used their battle reses earlier, and it is Method EU's game to take now as they deal with the last round of mobs that are spawning here in just a moment. Unbound Abomination down to 32%.
Okay, so this is Method EU's game to win. Just insanely clean run by them without even having this DKS we've seen from all those other teams. 0 deaths, 100% trash, and it's Method EU who's gonna win.
Yeah, Method EU is going to take this in a commanding victory. As the last blood spawn goes down, we have crowned our first cup champion in the West with an absolutely flawless
recap of this weekend. We have seen Method EU, the flawless run throughout this entire bracket here. Method NA put up an incredible fight coming out of the lower quarters here and making a very strong run, taking down those who sent them there in the first place. Abrakeydabra there is going to be followed up by the Eastern region here. So looking at the standings right now, Method EU taking home 140 points here. Method NA following with 100.